Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy Becomes Roger's Kid? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. One would think otherwise about the Pirate King, the strongest man alive, most feared man to live would be here in this situation right now. On his knees in front of a stone with the name Portgas D Rouge carved into it. Freshly buried with only a tiny bit of grass starting to grow over. A face full of tears as sobs escaped from him, tearing their way out of his throat. Who would have thought that the Pirate King would be this devastated about some women who had stolen from him, beat his butt, taken his portion of food? Only people who knew the real Pirate King. No people who knew him as Jolly Roger, happy-going man. Not a day of fear or regret resides in the man, until now that is. His wife, his beloved Rouge, that stubborn and most hard-headed woman he had ever met and had the pleasure of falling absolutely in love with was gone, no longer here with Roger by his side like they had promised. And their child was gone as well. Not dead at the very least, because if their child had died then Roger was sure their child would have been buried with his mother. There was no mention on the gravestone of there being a second person in the grave. Then that means curing his illness had been for nothing. He still had something out there for him to find. His greatest treasure. Just you wait, Roger spoke up, lifting himself off the ground and lifting his head up high to the sky. Just wait, my treasure, I'll find you, wherever you are I'll find you, my child. Roger picks the flowers that he had dropped a while ago when the grave had first come in sight. Red hibiscus flowers. My love, thank you. I cannot think how hard it had been holding our baby for the first and last time, Roger spoke, his voice deep and hoarse from his earlier crying. The pirate places the flower down in front of the gravestone and just for a moment he swore he could feel a body, shorter than his press up against his back. The very familiar feeling of Rouge leaning herself against his back. I'll find them, no matter how long it takes. He declares loudly, voice booming with determination and hope. He was going to find the child that Rouge had given her life for and he will take back their child from whoever decided it was okay to steal from the Pirate King. Crescent. Garp was visiting today and the bandits were out searching for the demon brat that Garp had dropped on them to take care of, and speaking of that kid, he apparently had to meet Garp because the old man had a surprise to show the kid. They had no idea what it was. They could only hope it wasn't anything that would bring them more pain and annoyance. Ace, you brat, get your butt down here right now. Dayton yelled up into some trees, gritting her teeth as she stared up at the 8-year-old boy who in return just glared at the women as he stayed put right where he was. Don't you want to see your demon Gramps? He said he had a surprise. That even for a brat like you, Dayton yelled up to the boy, muttering the last part under her breath. No way you hag, I ain't getting hit again by that old geezer. Ace shouted back down to Dayton as he stayed firmly put on the tree branch. Dayton could feel her blood boiling at this point. She swears this child would make her have a heart attack one of these days from making her blood pressure go sky-rocketing through the roof. She could feel the vein in her head throbbing. I don't care. Just get down here right now and greet your grandfather like a good grandson would. The curly-haired woman shouted at the top of her lungs, making the birds in the area take flight from the sudden loudness interrupting their peacefulness. It took way too much effort to get that brat out of the tree, having to get one of the bandits to climb up and drag him back down forcefully. Now here they were on their way back to the hut before Garp because they would rather not get a scolding from that man of all people. So, what the is that, Garp? Dayton says to the Vice Admiral Marine as she stared at the kid, probably 5 years old or a little older, that the man held by the shirt like he was scruffing some poor kitten. This is my grandson, and he's staying with you lot for now on. Garp tells them with no room for any excuses, backchat or arguing. Where's the other brat at? He needs to meet his new brother, Garp asks the bandits as he holds the dangling boy up. I got something for you, shouts Garp, which forces Ace to finally come out of the hut, mustering up the hardest scowl he possibly could give the old vice admiral. He comes out with his arms crossed and not realizing what Garp was holding out to him. Whatever it I don't want dash, Ace finds himself cutting himself off when he finally sees what the old geezer had for him. A silence passes through the whole jungle, all the bandits. all waiting for the reaction of the very, very fiery but rather feral and aggressive 8-year-old boy. "What the who is that?" Ace then said, his eyes narrowing in on the young boy in his Gramps' hold. "This is Luffy and he's your new brother," Garp says with a smile and calmly, like dumping a 5-year-old onto a 8-year-old kid was normal. "Say hi Luffy," Garp tells the other kid, lifting him up to say hi to all the bandits and Ace. "Yo, the kid," Luffy says as he gives them a wave. And Ace decides at that moment, he does not like this kid at all. "Great, now Ace, take care of your brother. I have to get back to work. Dayton, shape the both of them up into fine Marines by the time I come back," the old geezer tells the two kids and the curly-haired woman as he literally does dump Luffy right on Ace, making them both fall to the ground. Ace could feel his chest bursting with anger now. "What? No way, you crazy old bee!" Ace roared out to Garp, shoving Luffy off him without a care if the kid was a little scratched up from the roughness. But Garp was already making his way back to the docks to go back to his work. "Come back and take the brat with you," Dayton yelled right after Ace. No way in hell was she going to take care of another kid. She already raised Ace and looked how that kid came out. Garp. Glowing star. "So who's the kid?" Ace could only let an annoyed groan out as he reluctantly turned his head over his shoulder, and sure enough there stood Luffy. That annoying 5-year-old kid that has been dumbed onto him by both their Gramps, and even Dayton didn't even want to take the kid in while Ace wasn't there back at the hut. "I'm Luffy, AC dash," the ever so energetic and sweet-sounding kid was cut off by Ace with a low tone. "Luffy and that demon geezer left the brat with me," Ace grunted out annoyedly as he turned his head back to Sabo. Sabo raised a brow as he looked between the two of them. He has only known Ace for 3 years now, and sure enough he knows all about Ace's Gramps and how insane the old man was, but he never expected the guy would ever drop this 5-year-old happy-going-looking kid off to the bandits and Ace. Okay, why is he here? Shouldn't he be back with Dayton and the other bandits? Sabo asked Ace. He truly wondered why this kid has been following Ace since even before he and Ace had even met up. "Those fuckers decided to also dump him on me as well, said they ain't raising another kid," Ace told Sabo as he seethed with anger, tightening his grip around his metal pipe angrily. And Sabo understood he would be sad if his parents decided to drop a kid on him and expect him to raise that kid. "Hey, can I play with you guys?" Luffy then asked the two boys with a sense of childish innocence as he grinned up at the two older boys, eyes wide and practically shining with stars in his eyes. It off-put Sabo slightly. He wondered how this kid could be so happy despite being kinda abandoned by his Gramps and even by the bandits. But he was young and by the looks of it naive and dumb. "Let's just run, ignore him and trick the brat," Ace whispered to Sabo as he took a step closer to the blonde-haired boy. Sabo only took a second to think about it before he sharply nodded to Ace's words. Then they both had their backs turned the other way to the younger boy as they ran far away from Luffy, who was stunned for a moment before he started to chase after the two. "Wait for me," Luffy shouted out to the boys, trying to keep up with them with a smile on his face. Sabo almost found himself feeling bad for the kid now, almost. But they didn't need a kid like Luffy getting in their way or in danger either. He just hopes the beasts in this jungle don't get to the boy. That would be a bad death for a kid so young. Luffy ends up losing the boys as he stumbled down into a ravine the other two had led him to. Black small square, black small square. Weeks go by like that. Somehow Luffy always managed to find his way back to the hut around the time Ace arrives back to the hut, or sometimes even waiting outside in front of the hut with a blanket given by the bandits, just waiting for Ace to return. And it all made the freckled boy's blood boil every time he sees that crybaby still up and about, still alive and always right back at the hut. How has this brat not gotten lost in this jungle? How has he even survived in this place? All the beasts should have torn Luffy bit by bit and devoured. Why was he still coming back, giving him that bright innocent smile each time he sees Ace? So Ace decided to take things into his own hands. Look, he didn't really want to kill the kid, but he wanted the DMN brat to F off. So he started leading Luffy into ravines, made trees fall on top of the boy to spook him. He even left Luffy alone with one of the more tamer beasts in this jungle so he could take a hint. But seeing that Luffy was still following him around, it clearly wasn't working. "If we keep this up, we'll have more than enough to get a ship and everything," Sabo says with an excited grin as he stared down at all the money the both of them had managed to pull together within 2 years. How much do you think a ship could cost? Sabo questioned Ace as he started to put the money back into the cubby hole of the tree. Who knows, maybe 10 million or even more, but we shouldn't worry about that right now, Ace says to Sabo, returning the smile back to the blonde. What? Ship? You guys want to be pirates too? The boys jumped in the spots with Sabo quickly closing the hatch to their hidden stash in a panic. They looked down to find the one and only, of course, Luffy, that idiot smiling right up at them with a grin way too big for that small body of his. Ace can feel himself seething with anger again, his teeth gritting as he stares down at the young boy. Damn it, that little twerp. After coming down from the tree and tying Luffy up to the massive tree, Ace and Sabo discuss what they should do with Luffy now. Looks like we have no choice but to kill him, Ace says rather calmly as he looks down to Luffy, his metal pipe resting on his shoulder. It takes a moment for Luffy to process that sentence before he was thrashing around and screaming. No, this is scary, I don't want to die, cried Luffy as he thrashed around the ropes that held him tree. Ace and Sabo jump again slightly by the unexpected crying and thrashing coming from Luffy. Hot fat globs of tears ran down the boy's chubby cheeks like a waterfall. Don't kill me please. Someone help, Luffy cried out once more. Oh by the seas, were they really going to kill this 5-year-old kid? He hasn't even been alive for a decade. Ace, kill him already, hurry it up. Sabo said out of panic, looking at Ace who looked back at him with a slightly nervous look. No you kill him, I've never killed anyone before. Ace said as he gripped his metal pipe nervously. Well neither have I don't know how this stuff goes, Sabo tells Ace as they both look back at Luffy. Black small square. They had left Luffy to deal with Blue Jam's men, using the boy for distractions for now before he finally rats them out. They needed to move all their treasure now to a new spot where that brat and no one other than him and Sabo would be able to find it. Hours passed slowly as they had stuffed their money and treasure into boxes, carrying them to another location further away from their original hiding stop. This is serious. Sabo called out for the other boy, running to Ace with a panicked look. Blue Jam's guys aren't looking for us, he shouted to Ace, eyes wide with adrenaline and slight fear. What? But that would. Ace pauses mid-sentence when he realizes just exactly what was going on. He doesn't even realize his fist curling in on them tightly, they even tremble slightly with this unexplainable rage. Luffy, he hasn't ratted us out. Sabo shouted, panting just as loudly, they've been torturing him for hours. That was all Ace needed to hear, before he was grabbing his pipe and Sabo. His eyes blurred over slightly and his breaths came out as heavy and painful things, dangling up from the rope these big bullies tied him up to. I won't tell, Luffy muttered out weakly, biting his lip as he closed his eyes tightly, feeling the tears drip down his face. I won't tell you anything, the boy says with a tiny sob. It was amazing that he was even awake, right? He was only 5 years old and yet he's taking this torture session better than any grown man will. Still conscious somehow and still alive. He won't die, he won't. But that didn't mean he couldn't feel all the aches and sharp pains in his body, a bone probably broken or more. His head was dripping as well with red, it's bleeding as well. Luffy hopes Makino won't get too worried when he comes back to the party bar. Oh wait. That's right, he doesn't live there anymore, he's with the mountain bandits and Ace. Luffy doesn't even realize the ropes around him were being cut and someone had caught him as he had fallen down. In and out of consciousness, Luffy can distantly hear other voices. Sabo? Saw Sabo, Ace? Luffy called out to the two, sobbing softly. He had been placed back down onto the ground and Luffy could feel himself panic again. He didn't want to be alone again, so don't leave him alone again. He watches with tears-filled eyes and a throbbing head. Luffy watches as the two boys take down that mean old geezer. He felt himself smile ever so slightly. They came back for him, they saved him. You crybaby, I thought you wanted to be a pirate, what kind of pirate cries as much as you do? Ace shouted at Luffy when the boy finally started to come back to himself and started crying immediately when he remembered everything that had happened. At least the pirate thing had made the kid shut up and try to stop crying at least. Ace had tried masking his worry with anger, but he doesn't know how well it actually hides it. Alright, what gives? Why didn't you just tell them what they wanted? He snaps at Luffy. The boy was sitting on a stone while Ace had just finished bandaging his head. Thankfully his head wasn't so badly injured that they would have to go find a doctor. You think they wouldn't kill you 'cause you're a kid? Those guys don't give a damn, Ace told Luffy, harshly, but it was what the boy needed to hear, and Ace wanted to know why this demon annoying, stupid kid would put up with all that for them. Luffy was silent for a moment. A wind passed by them with a quiet whistle. I was afraid, Luffy admitted, that you wouldn't be my friend. Luffy croaked out, head down with his long spiky hair covering enough of his top half of his face. Really? That was it, he was afraid that Ace wouldn't be his friend? Yeah, so what? It still beats dying, right? Ace told Luffy with a confused tone. Besides, why do you want to be my friend? That's dumb, he told the younger boy as he rested his pipe against his shoulder. Because Luffy tried but didn't get another word in before Ace had continued on. Besides, it's not like I've been nice to you, in fact I've been giving you hell ever since we met. It's been months, why haven't you just given up? Ace questions the boy, his hands back down by his sides as he waited for Luffy's answer. Luffy's hands curled into his shorts, balling up the fabric in his hands ever so slightly. Cause I got no one else to turn to. Luffy admitted to Ace, looking up at the other, tears in his eyes and falling down his cheeks, some snot falling from his nose. Ace could feel something in him falter for a moment. I can't go to Fusha Village, and I don't like the mountain bandits either. I'll be all alone if I didn't follow you, he told Ace, his voice hoarse and croaky from how much he has cried and screamed already, his lip quivering as he spoke, and Ace could see in Luffy just how much being alone scares him. Being beat up hurts, but being lonely hurts more. Luffy exclaims as he stares at Ace with his teary eyes. The jungle for once is as silent as it can be, with ever so slight noises like bugs, crickets and the wind whistling its songs into the night. Alone, why? Ace finds himself asking Luffy. Gamps is all I have. Luffy simply responds back to Ace. You feel better around me? Otherwise you'll feel lonely? Ace stared at the boy. It shocked him to the core, because what kid like Luffy would ever feel better around a kid like him? Ace was silent as he processed what Luffy had just told him, and for that moment, memories plague his mind. If the Pirate King has a son? Well then that'll be one hefty of a bounty, capturing the Devil's son, but they'll definitely put the runt to death, and he'll probably deserve it. Pirate King's son, if ever did happen, then that child should just hope for death. He shouldn't even exist, much less deserve to live. He's probably a spoiled brat, daddy's little prince. I sure hope not. We don't need any more demons in this world wreaking things up. Pirate King is enough of a devil. If he did ever have a kid, I'd kill him. No kid like that deserves to live. Do you think I deserve to live? Ace then asks Luffy, looking down at the rock so he didn't have to look at Luffy. Of course I do. Luffy said to Ace with a confused tone, brows furrowed slightly at the question. He answered it so easily, so simply, and Ace wasn't sure what to feel. All right then, but I still find you annoying, he then mutters to Luffy as he turns his back to the kid. Weak little crybabies like you piss me off, he said without hesitation. That was then in the first moment that Ace and Luffy had finally started to bond, with Sabo along with them in tow. A beautiful bond starts to grow between the three boys. Unspecified currency. Wow, hey, did you steal that from Dayton? Luffy asks Ace as the older boy brought a bottle of sake out. Yep, you guys want to know a secret? Ace says to the two younger boys with a smile. Popping open the bottle, Ace pours it into all three Sakazuki cups with a grin. All it takes to be brothers is to share some sake. Wow, really? That's so awesome, Luffy says with an excited tone, eyes shining slightly. He's never had brothers before. This was so cool. We may sail on different ships, in different seas and on different crews, but no matter what we'll always be brothers, and no one can take that away, Ace tells his brothers with a newfound excitement. They all each take a cup of the sake, raising their cups up with a smile to each one of them. From now on, we're honest to goodness brothers, Ace says to his brother, a softness in his voice that he wasn't so used to, but he wouldn't mind using it for his brothers. Cheers to brotherhood. The sounds of their sake cups clinking together ring out slightly through the forest, with also their laughter filling the space around them. Taking a sip before they were all nearly spitting the sake out from the heavy taste of alcohol, which Luffy, the poor 5 nearly turning 6-year-old, drank immediately without a thought about it before he started gagging right after the aftertaste settled in. That's horrible," Luffy gagged out, sticking his tongue out of his mouth while his 2 older brothers swallowed the sake with some difficulty but ultimately ended up laughing at Luffy's reaction. Yeah, maybe they could have given Luffy something else, but they needed sake to be brother by everything other than blood. 2 years later, Luffy, Makino's amused and slightly tired voice sounded out in the bar. Seeing that little cheeky bugger back in his seat at the bar counter with a massive smile on his face, snickering slightly as he waved to Makino. "Shishishi, don't tell Gramps Okimino, I missed you," the young boy told the lady with of course his massive doe-like eyes to make it even better. He didn't even need to ask, but Makino was amused by it anyway. And well, she has missed having her little companion with her. She could feel her getting nostalgic. She could remember the boy had been so little when he had been first given to Makino to raise. Then she had been so heartbroken when Luffy had to leave when he was, of course. She would always go up to the bandits' hut to visit Luffy and his brothers, but it just wasn't the same. Oh, and did he get so big and so much older? Of course, Luffy, I wouldn't even dream of it, Makino mused back to Luffy as she walked behind the counter, putting on her bandana around her head to keep her hair back and tying her apron around her waist. "But if you're staying here, then would you like to help me out?" she asked the boy with her usual soft smile as she brushed back Luffy's unruly hair. Of course Luffy would agree, he always loved helping Makino out at the party bar. If only Luffy had known this one fateful visit down to Fush Village would change his and his brother's future. It was only set in stone when a pirate ship had anchored at the docks of the small peaceful village. It was always a long walk from Mount Kalubo to Fusha Village, maybe a day and half walk if the usual path down to Fusha Village was safe and there was no beast lurking around for their next meals. When Luffy started going down to Fusha Village, Ace and Sabo had sometimes accompanied their little brother, not trusting Luffy enough to take on any of the beasts in forest by himself if he were to encounter them, but slowly they had stopped going with their little brother after Gramps gave them the fist of love for going down to the peaceful village instead of training to be Marines. Of course that never stopped Luffy from going down to visit everyone at the village, even spending a couple nights down there instead of making his trek back up to Mt. Kalubo. But as of lately both Ace and Sabo haven't been seeing Luffy all that much anymore. Nonetheless, to say it was worrying them, but their little brother always came back unscathed, so they were fine for now, just put of edge slightly because their brother used to always follow his big brothers, help them hunt, train and fight with them, stealing and playing with the both of them. Luffy had always been attached to their hips and he always made their days brighter even on Ace's bad days. It's been months now and they were wondering what the hell was going on in Fusha Village since their last visit that made it so their little brother was staying down there instead of with his older brothers. Now that something has caught the attention of their little brother down at the village, and they weren't sure what it could be because Fusha was a peaceful village. Nothing really went down there. "This is worrying," Sabo, the first to admit it, said, staring up at the roof of their treehouse. Ace was silent, not responding back to his twin brother right away. Luffy doesn't even talk about why he's always down there for a long time, and that itself was surprising because their little brother always had a big and loud mouth, but now he doesn't tell his own brothers that he tells nearly everything. What has caught his attention? It was definitely concerning for the 10-year-olds and it was worrying the hell out of them both, more so Ace. But Sabo didn't need to know that this was pissing Ace off and even concerning the other boy as well. He has been becoming more snappy lately. Luffy wasn't there to balance the boy out either. There was always something with that kid and being able to bring out light from the darkest of places. Luffy has certainly done it for Ace and Sabo as well. The both of them couldn't help but feel ever grateful for having Luffy as their little brother. "We go down for Luffy tomorrow," Ace finally responded back to Sabo, his tone cold and low as he spoke. Slightly angsty from Luffy not being here with them, an ugly feeling gripped his heart when he couldn't hear Luffy's annoying snores anymore. Their brother wasn't with them anymore. Asleep next to his brothers where they knew the boy was alive, breathing and safe. And Sabo couldn't help but agree more with Ace right then. "Right?" Sabo replied with a sharp nod. And for one more night it was only Ace and Sabo in the treehouse, huddled close together for warmth for the colder nights. With a spot empty and voided by their little brother. By the morning the both of them were up and at it, skipping their usual routine as they climbed down from the treehouse in a rush. Bickering with each other as they make their way through the jungle until they end up right at the path they had made with Luffy going all the way down to Fusha village. But they hadn't even made it halfway down before they ran into Luffy, who was in deep thought with a small pout on his lips, kicking small rocks and dirt from whatever he was thinking. Only he was coming back with two new things, a straw hat that was a little too big for the boy and a freshly stitched up wound under his left eye with 2 stitches. When the 7-year-old finally looks up from the ground, his expression lightens up immediately when he sees his older brothers in front of him. Ace, Sabo. Luffy called out to his brother with a big smile that seemed to stretch wider than they remember. Oh www. Luffy then cried out as he fell onto his butt, his hand over the bump on his head from where his brothers had both hit him. Tears pricked the corner of his eyes slightly. Before the kid was gritting his teeth slightly, glaring up at his brothers. What was that for? Luffy shouted at his brothers with a pout as he whimpered at the throbbing pain. Both Sabo and Ace glared back at their little brother. You know what? The both of them yelled at Luffy. Where the hell have you been? Been worrying our buttes off and you come back with a scar under your eye? Ace scolded their brother, too angry to even realize how his brother's skin felt different and weirder. What the hell dash? Ace found himself cutting off in surprise. He had grabbed Luffy's cheek to pinch it roughly, but when he pulled on it, it stretched like rubber. Sabo and Ace stared in shock and surprise. Luffy's cheek snapped back when Ace had abruptly let go of it, making the younger boy hiss in pain slightly. A silence passes through the brothers, Ace and Sabo taking a moment to process what had just happened. What the F, Luffy? That was how Ace and Sabo found themselves storming down to Fusha village after Luffy had finally explained everything to his brothers. As per their demand, they knew what was going on with their little brother that they were supposed to protect. Luffy tried stopping his brothers, of course. He didn't want them beating Shanks up, not after the man had gone through all the trouble saving Luffy. His rubbery arms tried to latch around them, but it was no use, seeing as he still didn't know how to use his powers yet. Stop, no! Luffy shouted at his brothers to stop, trying to grab onto the arms, bodies, anything to stop them, but after hearing that it had been a pirate that was taking all their little brother's attention this whole time, and the fact the man got their brother to admire him so much that he stabbed himself under his eye just to show the pirate captain he had the courage and strength to be a pirate as well. Please. Shanks isn't a bad pirate, guys. Luffy yelled at his brothers, trying to interfere with them each bit of the way down to the village, but each time they just pushed Luffy out of their way, telling him to go back to the treehouse and to wait for him. Luffy, just go back already, we'll be back after we have a talk with this Shanks guy, Sabo told Luffy, stopping in his tracks, turning Luffy back around to the Wade Md. No. You don't get it. Shanks saved me, guys, and gave me his hat. Luffy yelled at his older brothers, his face turning red from frustration of not being taken seriously by the two of them. He saved you? Ace then questioned with a raised brow as he too stopped in his tracks, turning back around to face their little brother. Luffy nodded furiously. Yeah. Some stupid scum bandits had made fun of his crew and him, so I decided that I would fight them. Shanks came to save me from the bandits. But then one of them had taken me to the sea and dropped me into the ocean to drown. Then this massive sea king came and ate that yesterday bandit, but it ended up coming for me as well. Luffy then started explaining to his brothers. And if, can they feel their blood pressure rocketing up from Luffy explaining his rather eventful time. Then tears started to pool in Luffy's eyes as he looked to the ground, his straw hat covering his face as he does. Shanks saved me from the Sea King Bew, but he lost his arm because of me. Luffy cried out, his head tilting back up as he cried, tears being let down freely. Both Sabo and Ace flinched slightly when their brothers started letting out loud cries. Oh no, stop crying you baby, Sabo says to Luffy worriedly. The anger he felt before died down slightly when Luffy explained to them what happened, pulling the smaller one into his arms for a hug. While Ace just couldn't believe it, his stupid crybaby of a brother. Of course he would get himself into that kind of mess. But something ached in his chest when he really thought about it. What would have happened if this pirate guy hadn't gotten there in time? Would Luffy have lost an arm? Or would they have lost their little brother? They wouldn't even know about it until Makino would come up and would have to tell them the bad news that Luffy was dead. That thought sent an uncomfortable shiver down Ace's spine. He didn't like that thought one bit. He didn't like that at all. Luffy dead? No way. They should have been there for Luffy instead. They should have protected him instead of that Shanks guy. Glancing over to his brothers, Ace could feel his chest restrict slightly. It was almost sickening even thinking about losing one of his brothers. Ace felt himself do at the sight of Luffy's tears, ignoring how it made him feel about his brother. "Stop crying, you crybaby, you're not even hurt," Ace finally said, his tone softer than it had been before, not even masking the tinge of worry in his voice. Maybe these past 2 years Luffy really has gotten Ace to soften up a little bit more. "Not a crybaby," Luffy said with a sniffle as he hid his face into Sabo's napkin thing. At least the tears have finally halted to a stop. At least the boy was still him after that whole experience. "Sure you're not. You were literally bursting out in tears before, then you were crying into my shirt," Sabo teased their brother with a laugh which Luffy obviously didn't appreciate, squirming in Sabo's hold that had been tighter than usual for some reason. When Luffy did get out of Sabo's hold, he was yelling at the both of them, telling them that he told them that Shanks was a good guy and all that stuff, but Sabo wasn't exactly paying attention like he normally would. He couldn't help it. His brother, his little brother, the one that he and Ace were supposed to protect and take care of until they turned 17 and went out on their own adventures, could have died. Yes, Luffy could have died on multiple accounts, but him and Ace had always been there to protect him just in time. They could have lost a light in their darkness forever. They had been fine without Luffy before. They managed and survived while thinking about their big dreams, but if it weren't for Luffy basically their light in this darkness of a world of pain and cruelness. Luffy's such simplistic perspective of the world was a refreshing new look for both of the boys. He was the innocence that he and Ace had lost. How could a kid like Luffy ever smile at him and Ace like that, so filled with childish curiosity, brighter than the sun and filled with adoration and admiration for his older brothers? And they could have lost that so easily. "Okay," Sabo then said, getting the other two attentions. Sabo turns to Ace. "We're still going down to Fuchsia," he said to Ace. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. They were still going down to meet this Shanks pirate dude. If he really was as good as Luffy has said, then they'll have no need to beat the guy. Luffy's eyes widened slightly as he began to get nervous again. "What? You guys are still going to bash Shanks up?" Luffy exclaimed loudly, reaching out to grab his brothers again. No, he didn't want his brothers to still beat Shanks up even after he told them what happened. "We won't fight him, Luffy," Sabo tells Luffy, unwrapping the boy's flimsy rubber arms off him. He could hear Ace scoff quietly, then mutter something under his breath, but Sabo ignored him, for now. "We just want to talk to this Shanks guy, meet him, and even thank him for saving our kid brother," Sabo tells Luffy with a genuine sincerity. Luffy was quiet for a moment before relaxing, then letting go of his brothers. Like hell, thank a guy lick dash. Ace was quickly shut down when Sabo hit him in the guts with his pipe, making it look like an accident though. "Oh sorry Ace, you should move out if the way," Sabo teased his twin with a snicker and tiny smirk. At least getting a muffled laugh out of Luffy, but an angry scowl from Ace. "You'll pay for that, Sabo," Ace gritted out as he started chasing Sabo all the way down the path. Luffy followed his brothers with a loud and bright laughter that ringed out throughout the jungle. The three boys come tumbling into the village, Ace and Sabo wrestling each other on the ground, their pipes on the ground forgotten as they have their little wrestling match. Luffy stood on the sidelines watching his brother fight with wide eyes and his signature smile. Cheering each of them on, mostly Sabo since Ace always wins like the meanie he was. Of course this little commotion does bring some people's attention to them, but after seeing it was just Ace, Sabo and Luffy, they all went back to what they were doing with either amused smiles, chuckles or annoyed scoffs and mutters about children being children. It was a normal occurrence to see the three brothers roughhousing each other or trying to sneak some snacks they wouldn't find in the jungle into their pockets. "Go Sabo!" Luffy cheered on for his older brother with a smile as he bounced up and down excitedly, watching the two of them fight with amazement. He always liked to watch, but Luffy liked to join in with them much better, but Makino had strictly told him that he couldn't go rolling around in diet unless he wanted to get his wound under his eye infected and have to deal with that. Luffy wouldn't normally listen, but he remembers the last time he got his wound infected and that hadn't been a fun time at all. He had to stay at the bandits' hut the whole time because of how much Ace and Sabo worried over him, especially after Dayton had told them he could die from an infected wound if left untreated. That essigidi a lot. So for now he would only watch them fight until one of them came out victorious. "Hey Anchor, I thought you left a while ago," someone then said. The familiar voice makes Luffy immediately whip his head excitedly to the owner of the voice, Shanks. Luffy yelled out with a smile as he ran to the older man, crashing into his legs. Ace and Sabo stopped their fight and snapped their heads up, who Luffy called Shanks. Red hair, taller than all three of them stacked on top of each other. The man had a scar on his left eye as well. 3 claw-like scars went down his eye. He sorta looked like a pirate, and sure enough this guy was in fact missing an arm. Shanks gave Luffy a smile as he chuckled softly when the kid ran straight into his legs, almost making him go tumbling over. "Whoa there Luffy, careful now, my balance isn't as good as it was before," he told the kid. His still very much usable and attached arm moved from under his coat that rested on his shoulders. His hand made its way to Luffy's head, ruffling the boy's head. "Shishishi, sorry Shanks," Luffy apologized, but he didn't look sorry for it at all. The redhead then looked up to see the 2 other kids who had originally been wrestling now up and giving Shanks a guarded glare. "Who are these twerps, Anchor?" Shanks asked Luffy with a laugh as the young boy let go of his legs and went running to the other 2 boys, pulling the both of them easily enough to Shanks. "These are my brother, Sabo and Ace," Luffy told Shanks, practically beaming with excitement that his 3 favorite people now finally get to meet. Even if his brothers were a bit hostile at first. Shanks had looked over the 2 boys. One was blonde, short hair, and seemed to like to wear blue a lot with a top hat, rather noble kind of wear, but at the same time not really. He was still dirty, clothes slightly tattered. The kid had a polite smile and seemingly friendly look if Shanks didn't know better, but the red-haired could see the more observant look this kid had, masking his actual intentions with a friendly smile, so he was a smart one. But it was the other boy that had caught Shanks slightly off guard, because it was almost like looking at his captain only in child form. They shared the same black hair, eye color, chin, but at the same time he could see rouge in the boy. He had her freckles. Those were definitely her freckles, and they both shared wavy hair, lips, and face complexion. It was almost unreal. Seeing both Roger and Rouge in the boy, he was like almost a perfect mix of the 2. If it weren't for the deepening glare and scowl he gave Shanks, then he definitely would have thought the kid looked more like Roger, but dammit, he has his mother's look. It had almost stopped his heart. No way his captain's kid has been all the way out here for the past 10 years. Roger has searched the whole Grandline for the boy, and he was still searching in the different blues, and to think he was being raised here in the East Blues on Dawn Island. "So you are the brothers that Anchor has told me all about, huh?" Shanks said to the 2 boys, making sure to keep his cool. He didn't want to scare the kid off by claiming he was the Pirate King's son that has been missing for the past 10 years, and technically no one should even know that the Pirate King had a son in the first place. And Shanks has a feeling that this kid would react badly to that information, considering all the articles about Joel D. Roger was anything but friendly. They really made Roger sound like a monster in those. "Anchor?" Ace questions with a raised brow as he crossed his arms, glancing to Luffy. And Shanks corrected, like mother like son. He has a feeling that Ace is not willing to be as friendly as his brothers. The nickname seemed to make Luffy pout slightly. "Yeah, he was wearing a shirt with an anchor when we first met and refused to give me his name, so I called him Anchor," Shanks informed the 2 brothers with a laugh as he ruffled Luffy's hair, seeing the way the 2 older boys tensed slightly at the action. "But I guess he really is an Anchor now, huh?" Shanks then added, his hand being pushed away by Luffy, who angrily slaps his hand away from his head. "Yeah, all because of that stupid fruit you let him eat," Ace says to Shanks with a low and dangerous tone. "It's not stupid, Ace," Luffy said to his brother with a small scowl on his face. "Yes, it is, you idiot. Being rubber is a completely useless ability to have now you can't swim anymore." Ace growled at Luffy with a snappy tone, but it definitely lacked the hostility in it that Ace had used for Shanks. Their foreheads rammed into each other roughly as they yelled at each other, pushing one and another back. Okay, now let's calm down, Shanks then intervened, moving to pull the two brothers back before Ace had reacted faster than Shanks had expected the kid to be able to react. Pulling Luffy's arm to him and letting the younger boy crash into his chest, giving Shanks an angrier scowl than before, a vein popping out in his head. Wow, this kid could get angry, huh? Even the blondie stepped forward as well, seemingly also not trusting Shanks one bit. So Shanks retracted his hand back slowly as if he was dealing with a bunch of feral animals. Only difference was that it was feral kids that he was dealing with. Well, other than the fact that you let Luffy eat a devil fruit, stab himself in the face and let him go after different mountain bandits, Sabo then spoke up, calmer than the other two were. We do appreciate that you saved our kid brother from a sea king at the loss of an arm, Sabo surprisingly says to Shanks. He wasn't expecting a thanks especially from these two kids, but hey, it was definitely nice. Shanks lets out a surprised laugh, throwing his head back slightly as he laughed, his hand reached up into his red hair, brushing it back as he does. Really, it was no problem. Little Anchor means a lot to me as well. I would do it again with no hesitation, he tells the boys with a cheerful and fully sincere tone. Ace and Sabo look at him with a suspicious glance before looking down at Luffy, who was beaming at Shanks's words. Really, Shanks? You lose your arm again for me? Luffy says with wide and starry eyes, practically buzzing with enthusiasm, ripping himself from Ace's hold. If it weren't for Luffy's age, Shanks would have thought he had been Roger's son. With that personality of his, it was basically the same. Of course, Luffy, no one gets to hurt the people I care for, he tells Luffy as he just narrowly catches the boy that jumps onto him, deciding that he wanted to be held by Shanks for now. This demon pirate a-hole was stealing their little brother and Luffy was falling right for it. If it weren't for his dream of becoming a pirate, then this wouldn't be happening. Sabo could basically feel the angst and anger that was radiating off of Ace, gripping his pipe so tightly that Ace has probably left dents on it. But Sabo couldn't help but agree more with Ace. Sure, this Shanks guy seemed like an actual good guy, and Sabo was still very grateful for Shanks saving their little brother, but that doesn't mean he could just steal Luffy from them. Sabo didn't like this one bit either. He just wanted to go back to the treehouse and go back to what they normally did: hunt, fight beast in the jungle, train with his brothers, and talk about their dreams of leaving this place behind to explore the seas and become great pirates. It was leaving an uneasy feeling in his chest just thinking about Luffy going to hang out with this random pirate dude that he has known for only nearly a year than his big brothers that swore to protect him and each other. It's just, none of this was right to Sabo, and he couldn't help but get the feeling that something massive could change in the sooner future than he thought. Sabo forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to calm himself down. He was just being paranoid, that was all. If this guy really wanted to steal Luffy, then him and Ace would beat the guy up just like they had done with the Blue Jams. Sabo hopes he was only being paranoid. They had been walking behind Shanks for a while now. They had been on their way to Makino's party bar for some lunch. Shanks's was still carrying Luffy with his one arm, the boy on his hip kinda like a baby, which Sabo and Ace had definitely teased Luffy for, but other than that the two of them have stayed relatively quiet for the whole walk, only talking when Luffy speaks to them or Sabo hesitantly answering Shanks' questions while the raven-haired boy just full-on ignored the man, but that hadn't seemed to annoy Shanks yet. Luffy had jumped down from Shanks' arm when they made it to the entrance of the party bar, rushing inside with a yell. "Makino food!" Luffy called out to Makino, ignoring his brothers yelling at him to say please and to be more polite to Makino. The bar was full, rowdy people all around, standing up or sitting down, talking loudly, drinking just as loudly, and Ace and Sabo have reason to believe that these guys were from Shanks's crew. But they didn't seem to be causing any trouble for Makino or the residents of Fusha village, but to the twins' displeasure. But as long as they weren't trouble, then Ace and Sabo were fine for now. Sabo and Ace were quick to catch up with Luffy, stealing the 2 seats on each side of Luffy so no one else could sit beside their brother, not even Shanks. "Oh, don't you two worry about," Makino from the other side of the counter tells Sabo and Ace. "Luffy doesn't mean it in a bad way, do you?" the woman says softly with an amused tone, looking at Luffy with a wide grin, which Luffy immediately starts nodding to Makino's words. That's right, I'm not a big meanie like Ace is, shishishi." Luffy snickers out as he kicks his legs back and forth excitedly, even as Ace hits Luffy's head with an annoyed grit of his teeth. "I'm not mean, you're just a big crybaby. I have more manners than you," Ace snapped at Luffy, smirking slight at Luffy's whines. "I am not a crybaby." Luffy yelled out angrily before Makino had placed a glass of milk in front of Luffy, which immediately caught the boy's attention. "Thanks, Maino." Luffy then finally thanked the older women with a beaming smile, drinking the glass of milk eagerly. Ace and Sabo turned to look at each other with a snicker. "Luffy, what kind of pirate drinks milk like a baby?" Sabo then teased Luffy, the both of them letting out loud laughs as Luffy slammed the cup down and started shouting at them again for their teases. Makino only shook her head fondly at the three-brother antics, having gotten used to them a long time ago. Every so often Luffy got caught up in different cover stations with different people from Shanks's crew, most often with a dude named Yasop. He was funny sort of and really good sniper, like he was really good. Ace and Sabo didn't mind the dude too much. Lucky was also pretty fun as well. Then Ben, Shanks' supposed best mate. Ace and Sabo at first weren't too sure, but the guy was cool and calmer than Shanks was. Ace thinks he is better than Shanks, and Sabo was half and half between the two pirates. When their food was finally given to them, they were reminded by the loud growls their stomachs gave them by just how hungry they had been, since Sabo and Ace missed out on eating breakfast to retrieve their idiot little brother, and Luffy was always just hungry. They shoveled more food into their mouths faster than any grown man can. It even catches some people in the bar surprised by just how much these three pharaoh-like kids could stuff into the seemingly bottomless stomachs. Well, the twins were surprised at Luffy now because he could just keep filling his mouth with more and more food and his body would just accommodate to the stretch. Then it all went down just like that. "Huh," both Ace and Sabo said at the same time before they had continued eating their food, looking more sensible than Luffy now as the boy stuffed his cheeks like a chipmunk. "Hey, would you guys like a tour of our ship?" Shanks asks the three kids, sliding up the bar counter, elbow resting on the counterpart. He shines them a smile which is only reciprocated by Luffy. The other two looked interested but didn't know if they could really trust this red-haired guy. The red-haired Shanks people call him. His is supposed to be a rather infamous pirate, which makes Sabo and Ace confused as to why such a big-shot pirate was doing here in the East Blues out of all the other seas he could be at, the weakest seas out of them all. "Yes," Luffy shouted excitedly, jumping up onto his chair, only stumbling a little bit before Sabo was balancing the young boy on the chair. "Come on guys, please, let's go, Luffy begged his brothers, giving them both his puppy eyes. And everyone knows, they couldn't say no to Luffy's little puppy eyes. It was something the boy took advantage of regularly. Shanks found himself laughing the Ace's and Sabo's expressions when Luffy pulled the puppy eyes out on them. They were struggling and trying to divert the attention to something else, but Sabo was the first to falter. "Fine," Sabo groaned out, giving up on even trying to resist Luffy's puppy eyes. Ace glared at him as if trying to get on Sabo's back for agreeing, but the blonde only glared back at Ace with a look that told the raven-haired boy that he would have done the same thing. Ace only scoffed but hopped off his chair along with Sabo and helping Luffy get down from his own chair that he had been standing on. "Whatever, we'll see your ship, it's probably really lame anyways," Ace says as he grabs onto Luffy's hand, an action he wouldn't normally find himself doing, but he didn't want to lose Luffy on some random pirate ship. "It's not lame, Ace, it's really cool and really big as well," Luffy tells Ace, not even caring that Ace had grabbed his hand. Luffy didn't mind, he liked it actually, he liked when his brothers were with him. Sabo and Ace let Luffy ramble on and on about Shanks' ship more than the guy that owned the ship. Shanks had just walked with the kids to the docks. Listening in on the conversation, or more like listening to Luffy ramble on about his ship. It warmed his heart that the kid admired him so much. "Ah, here she is, kiddos," Shanks says as they got the harbor, hands on his hips. As he looked back to three kids, the beauty herself, the Red Force. It was definitely a beautiful ship, Sabo couldn't deny that, and the head figure on the front of the ship was also pretty cool. But there was something familiar with the Jolly Roger flag they had. Sabo narrowed his eyes on the Jolly Roger, trying to think of where he had seen that before, but he was snapped out of his thoughts when he felt a hand grabbing his own in a tight grip. It was Ace. Sabo looks to his twin with a confused look. "Ace? What's dash?" Sabo had cut himself off at the expression on Ace's face. His face twisted into something that was mixed with rage, confusion, and but mostly anger, and both Sabo and Luffy have never seen their brother this angry before. His grips on their hands were deathly tight, but not to the point it would hurt his brothers. stopping either one of his brothers from moving any closer to that ship. You're part of the Roger Pirates? The Roger Pirates? Sabo's face turned from one of confusion to surprise. That's where he remembers the Jolly Roger now, looking back at the flag, and sure enough, that was definitely the Roger Pirates flag. And Sabo can see why Ace is acting the way he is now. Oh yeah, we are part of the great Roger Pirates. I used to be the cabin boy a long time ago too, Shanks proudly admitted to Ace, looking so prideful in something so evil. How could he be so proud for working under someone like the Roger Pirates captain? Ace. Luffy called Ace with a worried glance, wondering why the sudden change in demeanor. Why was he acting like this? The Roger Pirates? Who were they again? Luffy couldn't remember, but the name sounded slightly familiar. The raven-haired boy just gritted slightly, pulling his brothers closer to him and away from this red-haired bastard. Damn it, he should have known better than to even think of interacting with someone associated with the DM and Roger Pirates. Ace knew he heard something about the red-haired Shanks somewhere. Gosh, he couldn't believe he let his little brother so close with one of them. What's wrong? Luffy asked Ace, his voice dripping with worry and slight fear. He really hasn't seen his older brother like this in a very long time. It was almost scary. Ace looked down to Luffy, his grip softening ever so slightly at the expression on his face. Luffy, this guy is part of the Roger Pirates, Ace stated to Luffy, his tone very serious as he spoke. They aren't good pirates, he said bluntly to the boy, who for a moment froze, taking in the words his brother told him. His words seemed to hit Luffy hard, though, seeing as the boy got a bit teary, his brows furrowing in slightly and his lips pursed close. What? Luffy says with a trembling voice before he was repeatedly shaking his head in denial, trying to pull away from his brother. What, wait? Shanks then said in his own surprise. Okay, look, he knows most people don't react all too kindly to his crew, but this was something new coming from a kid like Ace. The Ace Shanks was so sure was the missing child of his captains and his beloved wife, Rouge. Okay, no, wait. I think you got the wrong idea about us, kid, Shanks then said softly to Ace. He knew Ace wouldn't react well, but come on, it was like he had some deep grudge against someone he has never met before. This time both Sabo and Ace moved back from Shanks, Sabo also helping to pull their poor, upset brother away. Nah, I don't have the wrong FNG idea, Ace snarled at Shanks aggressively. You're part of a notorious pirate group that has caused nothing but pain and trouble all over. The boy snapped loudly, making Luffy flinch slightly. Shanks swallowed slightly. This was going to be harder than he had thought. The minute he should have listened to Ben. We're not like that, we're not, Shanks tried again, taking a hesitant step forward. Eyes trained on Luffy, the poor kid was upset and scared. Ace, come on buddy, how about we just calm down? You're scaring Luffy, Shanks said to the kid, hoping that Ace would come to some sense and calm down for his little brother. But that didn't seem to work. It actually had the opposite effect than what Shanks wanted. You don't get to be worried for our brother, Sabo then finally stepped in. Surprising Luffy, the young boy had thought Sabo had been getting along with Shanks, better than Ace at least, but if they were both acting like this, did that mean Shanks really wasn't good? Both of them had scowls on their lips and looked angry. What did Shanks do? Did he really cause pain all over the seas? But then, why had he been so nice to him? Makino and everyone in the village. No! Luffy cried out, slamming a fist against Ace's chest. No way! Shanks isn't like that, he isn't, Luffy yelled at his brothers, tears falling down his cheeks for a second time that day, and as much as Ace hated seeing Luffy cry like a wuss, he couldn't help but feel slightly bad for his brother. Luffy is always too naive and gullible for his own good. Demon Kid was asking to be betrayed and hurt. You should really listen to Dash, Shanks says softly again before he was being cut off. Stay away from us, Ace snapped at Shanks, giving the older man an intense glare, surprising Shanks even further. And soon enough the sun had been blocked, dark gloomy clouds blocked the rays of the sun. It didn't take long till a few drops of rain started. If they didn't start heading back to Mt. Kalubo, then the path would start to get too muddy and wet to walk through without the hazard of slipping. Sabo, Luffy then cried out to his other older brother when Ace was letting go of him. Sabo, what's going on? Why is Ace acting like this? Why are you acting like this? Luffy asks Sabo, reaching out for the blonde's sleeve. Sabo gives Luffy a pitiful look. He was always more gentle with Luffy and nicer. Ace says he'll spoil Luffy, but Sabo didn't care. Luffy was just too cute and amusing to not spoil. But right now wasn't the time. Seeing as Luffy was bawling his eyes out in Ace's arms, Sabo knew he had to be the one to comfort Luffy. Sabo pulls Luffy out of Ace's hold easily enough, trusting his brother to calm Luffy down. "Luffy, we gotta go. We'll tell you everything when we're back at the treehouse," Sabo whispers to Luffy, gently patting the boy's back as Luffy lets out choked-out sobs and sniffles. "No. Shanks isn't bad, he isn't. Why was he so nice to me and everyone else, huh?" Luffy tells his brothers he doesn't understand why they don't like Shanks and why they were saying he wasn't a good pirate. "Because Luffy, he's part of the Pirate King's crew," Ace told Luffy, impatient as always, Sabo thought. Luffy's eyes widened slightly, and maybe with slight awe. The Pirate King? And yes, they both knew that Luffy's dream was to become the next Pirate King because he is the freest one of them all. And Ace can support that because it was Luffy. Not an inch in his little brother could ever be bad. But the current Pirate King? Oh, Ace held a deep hatred for the man. And for anyone that associates themselves with him, seeing how proud Shanks had been, it had just ticked Ace off so fing much. He didn't know how a man like Shanks could be so prideful for having a man like the Pirate King as his captain. The man was a monster, a devil that ruined people's lives. Just like Ace. Just like how Ace was a monster, all because he was that shithead's BSTRD's son. His blood tainted and cursed with that BSTRD's own blood. He wishes he could claw it all out of him. It was disgusting and felt like bugs under his skin. Oh, how Ace hated it so much. The rain started to pour harder now, and Sabo was tugging on Ace's shirt. "We gotta go. The longer we take, the harder it'll be to travel through the jungle," Sabo tells Ace, keeping an eye on Shanks. He knew what his brother was thinking, right, and Sabo would talk to him later, but right now they just needed to get away. "No!" Luffy tried again before Ace was turning to him and gave Luffy a stern glare, cutting the boy off. "Luffy, I know how much you care about this man, but anyone from the Pirate King's crew is always bound to leave you behind, Luffy," Ace says to Luffy, trying to be more gentle about it and less harsh, but he was pretty sure it still sounded harsh to Luffy. The look Luffy had on his face when Ace told him that almost broke Shanks's heart. He didn't know where Ace got that from, but whoever gave it to him was dead meat, because they would never do that. Roger would never abandon anyone that he cares deeply for. "What? You were going to leave me?" cried Luffy with a trembling voice that became slightly more hoarse. Shanks didn't know if he should be glad or not that they weren't close enough to the party bar to be heard by anyone else. "Luffy, anchor," Shanks said to Luffy with a sharp inhale. He didn't know what to say because it feels like whatever he has said has made things worse. Luffy's wide, watery eyes stared at him with a look of betrayal, and Shanks couldn't take it. That look sent a straight, critical stab to his heart. I leave all the time, right? I'm a pirate, Luffy. I'm always on adventures," Shanks says, trying to regain his composure and himself now. He couldn't mess this up. He couldn't see Luffy get his heart hurt. "But were you going to come back after this next adventure of yours?" This hissed out to Shanks, and everything just went silent. The sound of rain pouring down harder and harder filled the void between the three boys and the red-haired pirate. "Beat, Shanks, why you told me you'll always come back to visit? You said so yourself." Luffy yelled at Shanks, cheeks red and face slightly swollen from his tears and crying. "Luffy, please, you have to understand, I was going to tell you," Shanks told the kid with a desperate tone. He stepped forward, and for the first time, Luffy stepped back willingly. No. Not his anchor, not the kid he had grown so attached to. He couldn't blame his big brothers though, because they both genuinely seemed to believe that the Roger pirates were bad people, monsters. "Shanks was going to leave me." Luffy cried out loudly enough that Shanks was pretty sure the others had heard Luffy's heartbroken wail. The two older boys now having the advantage of Luffy not fighting against them anymore, Sabo started to drag Luffy out of there, running for the pathway up to Mt. Kulubo. Ace was going to run with his brothers but stopped for a second. He turned his head over his shoulder and gave Shanks the same look as before. A loud thunder crackled in the sky. "Stay away from us." The clouds lit up brightly as a loud booming sound was made. "And stay the hell away from our little brother." The lightning struck right in that moment. The seas roared angrily and splashed against the boats and ships at the docks harshly, waves crashed into each other roughly. Just like that, Ace had taken off running, catching up with his brothers. Surprisingly fast for 10-year-old boys. Shanks knew he should have gone after them. He should have. They were heading straight for the jungle in this kind of weather, so it would have been a good idea. But he didn't move, just stood there in the rain and in the loud howling of the rougher and harsher winds. His crewmates came rushing out of the bar. They were dragging him to the Red Force. Some questioned where the 3 bottomless pits were. S-Sha-NK. But Shanks was completely out of it, just staring blankly to where the 3 boys had run off to. It was until someone was grabbing his shoulders and his head was roughly whipped to one way. Shanks, snap out of it. Yassip yelled at his friend, shanking him some more before Ben was pushing the man to the side, moving himself in front of their boss. Ben looked worried for him, that concerned furrowed brows and look in his eyes. Shanks? Shanks, what happened? Where's Luffy? And the other 2? Ben, his best mate, one of his closest friends, asked Shanks, and he looked absolutely drenched. Shanks shivered as cold goosebumps made themselves known. He was wet as well. He had just been standing here in the rain while the captain's boy or boys now ran off into that jungle in this weather. Sheet! Shanks exclaimed loudly, finally coming back to himself. He looked back to the ship. All the guys were working on securing the ship tighter to the docks so it wouldn't drift off, taking everything on the deck that wasn't waterproof down below. Ben, I need you to call Roger for me, Shanks then said to Ben, his tone as serious as it ever could be, and they all knew when Shanks was serious, man was serious, and either Sheet was going to go down or something happened. It didn't look like Sheet was going to go down though, so something must have happened if Shanks was telling Ben to go straight to contacting Roger. The captain? But Shanks, what the hell happened? Talk to me, Ben demanded from his friend. He wanted to know what happened. Where were the kids? Just tell the captain that we found his boys. Tell him where we are and to get here fast. Shanks told Ben quickly before he was running off to where the 3 brothers had run off to, ignoring the calls for his name by a surprised Ben and other crewmates. The sounds of the rain and thunder drowned them out, but the only thing on Shanks's mind: getting those boys back. It was getting harder to get back up the mountain. The path was slowly fading away back into nature as the rain poured harder. Luffy clinged onto Sabo tightly, tears still pouring down his face as he let out quiet sobs. Sabo had given Luffy a piggyback because he kept stumbling on everything and couldn't keep up with Sabo in his state. The boy hasn't let up. Sabo was starting to feel bad for Luffy. He could tell how much he really admired that Shanks guy, but he was part of the Roger pirates. He would have hurt Luffy worse than this if they had continued to let Luffy see his pirate friend. Ace still hasn't said anything after he had caught back up with them. He was angry and angsty. Sabo knew how much his brother hated the Roger pirates, how much he hated the captain of the pirate crew, his dad. But Sabo wished it didn't have to go like that with Luffy right there, but they couldn't trust pirates like that. All they needed was each other. They can rely on the bandits and Dayton for while they are here on Dawn Island, but soon enough they were going to leave to become pirates, either together or separated. They could only trust each other. They were brothers and they swore an oath. It's gonna be all right, Luffy, Sabo said to the boy, trekking up further the muddy and slippery wet steep. He has been whispering words of comfort to Luffy, but he doesn't think it was really working. No worries, as soon as they got out of the rain and dried, warm with maybe some food, then he can properly comfort Luffy. Looking over his shoulder, Sabo looks back to Ace, who was holding his arms close to him, trying to keep whatever body warmth he had close. He was shivering, they were all shivering, more so Luffy than his brothers. Luffy let out a whine, nestling his head into the crook of Sabo's neck and shoulder. It's cold, Sitabo, Luffy trembled out, voice shaking and hoarse. His chest kept hurting as well. He didn't like this. He wants to be back at the party bar. He wants Makino and Shanks. This storm wasn't letting up anytime soon. It had come out of nowhere as well. It was getting harder to tell where they were going in this downfall of rain. Sabo wonders if they could just go back down to Fusha village, but Shanks was down there and all the other pirates. There was a good chance they had set them off as well. We know, Lou, we'll be back at Dayton soon enough, Sabo responded back with a tired and exhausted tone. Each step he took made a squelching noise. Then one misstep, A root had been hidden under all the landslides and footing had slipped and he was nearly falling backwards. "Sheet!" he yelled. He couldn't fall now, not when Lou was on his back clinging like a little monkey. Before they both fell into the muddy, wet ground, Ace rushed to grab Sabo before he and Luffy fell onto the ground, but with the extra weight of Luffy, Ace found himself losing his own footing. They fell back, sliding down the steep slope they had just gone up with a yell. Luffy had unlatched himself from Sabo. They go tumbling down hard and rough, mud definitely covering them head to toe as they rolled and tumbled, grunting and letting out pained yells as they fell. From time to time they would hit each other with whatever limps were frailing around. But Luffy, each time that he crashed into his brothers, were more like being cushioned. It still hurt but with his rubber body, but it felt like they were taking less impact than they should have, and Luffy's body was absorbing the impact each time. "Sheet, that hurts," Ace groaned out with a pained whimper. They were all flat out on the ground, covered in mud, cuts and bruises. The rain was still pouring down without any means to stop. They didn't know where they were right now. They were too tired and in pain to think about it. Sabo grunted from where he was laid out, letting out wheezy pants as he stared up blankly at the dark clouds that blocked out any ray of the sun-warm kisses of sunlight. And he wheezed out, trying to get up, but his side was hurting way too much. He was pretty sure he tumbled right into the tree. "Lou!" Sabo called out for Luffy. The boy was never quiet for this long, especially when he was hurt. He was always whining and complaining that his sores hurt. A moment passes, then another. Why wasn't he answering back? "Lou? Luffy?" Sabo called out again. He was getting worried. What happened to Luffy? Why wasn't he calling back out to him? Sabo, in his concern and worry for his little brother, forced himself back up. His eyes squinted in the rain, trying to make out everything. Ace was there in front of Sabo, laid out on the ground, looking around as well. But Luffy wasn't here with them. Where did he go? "Luffy!" They shouted at the top of their lungs. Not the best idea for when they are in a jungle filled with massive beasts, but at least the heavy downfall of rain drowned out the scream. But also then Luffy wouldn't be able to hear them. The twins forced themselves up off the ground. Despite their bodies screaming at them in pain, they forced themselves up. They can't lose Luffy here, not in the jungle, not where it wasn't safe. Where could have he gone? "I thought he was falling with us," Ace exclaimed, his voice carrying worry and even fear. Sabo looked at Ace with a slightly surprised look. Ace hasn't sounded this worry for Luffy in a long time. They both knew their little brother was stronger than he had been when Blue Jam had him. Of course he was that 2 years ago, and he has been training with him and Ace for those past 2 years, so they knew Luffy knows how to take care of himself. But that didn't mean Ace couldn't stop worrying for their little brother. He doesn't think he could take it if he lost Luffy and Sabo. But he has already lost Luffy right now. He nearly lost his little brother to a Sea King, a couple of different mountain bandits, and nearly to that DMN red-haired pirate, and now they had just gone falling down a slope and Luffy wasn't here with his older brothers. He was the worst brother ever, wasn't he? Why couldn't he just do better? Why did he have to be so bad at this? He needed to be better. He needed to do better for his brother. If he could do them good, then maybe that can excuse his cursed blood. Why wasn't he ever there for Luffy, when he attacked those bandits, when he got dropped into the sea to die, then nearly eaten by a Sea King? How could his brothers rely on him to protect them when he was already failing at it? "Ace!" The boy was then snapped out of his spiral of despair when his twin screamed right in his ear, making Ace jump at the loudness. He pushed Sabo back with a groan, hand up to his ear that was slightly ringing. "What the hell, Sabo?" Ace yelled right back at his brother with a scowl. Sabo hit Ace's head with a scowl of his own. "Don't what me, I know what the hell you're thinking," Sabo growled at Ace, pulling his twin up closer by his shirt with a glare. "It's not the time for this, Ace. Luffy is missing and he needs us right now," Sabo tells Ace, his tone firmer and sterner than ever before. Luffy could be hurt. He's scared right now and upset. Who knows what beast he could run into right now or what can find him. Sabo kept on going to Ace, dragging his twin out of that stupid head of his. Ace finds himself frowning harder, glaring harder before he takes a deep breath in and out. His expression softens slightly before he is jerkily nodding to Sabo's words. That was right, his twin was right. Luffy was missing right now. They don't know how hurt their little brother was. And they don't know whether or not he could fend for himself out here in the jungle after that tumble of theirs. Okay, Ace choked out. His hands reached up to Sabo's own and pushed them off him. Yeah, you're right, we need to find Luffy, Ace agreed with the blonde, coming back to himself now. The rain wasn't pouring down as hard anymore. It was still raining, but it was getting lighter, and thankfully it was also washing the mud off their bodies. NGH. Luffy's eyelids flutter open. A dull thundering pain in his head wakes the boy up, making the 7-year-old whine out in pain and let out a pained sob. It hurts. It hurts, Luffy cried out with a wobble, tears running down his dirty cheeks. He could still feel the rain hitting his back. It was so cold. Ace. Esibo, Luffy cried out, trying to look up. He was shaking and trembling. There was something warm dripping down his head, but only for a moment before the rain was washing it away. Luffy's heart stutters and his chest tightens when he doesn't hear a response back. Sabo. Luffy called to his second eldest brother with a whimper, waiting for a response to come, but one didn't ever come. Luffy doesn't panic. He doesn't panic. Is he panicking? Luffy choked out, his body aches and he lets out a choked sob. He can't cry right now, he can't. If his brothers weren't responding back to him, then that must mean they were in trouble. Maybe they needed his help. He lifted his head up after what had felt like an eternity. His head was really killing him right now and he doesn't know why. With blurry vision, Luffy looked around his surroundings. He couldn't pinpoint exactly where he was, but he knew he wasn't close to the bandits' hut or their treehouse. His brothers were nowhere to be seen. They weren't here with him. Did they get lost? Had they gotten split up? Luffy grimaced slightly. He hopes they got split up, because then that meant Ace and Sabo didn't leave him on purpose. They wouldn't do that to him. He was their little brother and he knows they love him even if they have a harder time showing it. But not to worry, Luffy has enough love to show his brothers. I should go look for them, Luffy decided, getting up from the wet, mushy and gross ground. He was all dirty now. That would mean he would have to take a bath later. Luffy pouted at the thought. He didn't like baths one bit. Getting up proved harder than he thought. His body ached and stung from all the cuts littering his body. Oh man, his clothes were torn up as well. This Essegus. The boy stumbled on his feet before managing to balance himself. Reaching behind his head, at least he still got his straw hat, Luffy thought with a smile before it quickly vanished. Right, Shanks? He still really wasn't sure what happened. It all went so fast for Luffy, but it saddened him. Shanks said he was going to leave, for good this time. He always left, but he always came back for Luffy. Luffy didn't like the way it made his chest feel, queasy, uneasy and tight. It even hurt. His pout became slightly bigger before he was shaking his head. He didn't need this right now. What Luffy wanted right now was his brother. He can ignore the pain. He wasn't a crybaby anymore. He'd show both Ace and Sabo. He'll save them and finally tease them for once. So with a determined smile now pulled onto his lips, Luffy started making his way back to the path. He was pretty sure it was this way anyways. The rain started to become lighter then, softening on its relentless pursuit. The thunder and lightning strikes became less and quieter. The jungle was filled with instead the humming of a 7-year-old boy, just making his way back to his brothers. He hadn't even realized when he had stopped crying. Pururu pururu. Shanks? My boy, do you have something for me? A rough and gruff voice sounded out from the transponder snail, but it held no hostility or maliciousness. This is not Shanks, Captain, Ben said to the captain. It was quiet for a moment before Roger was responding back. Ben matey, what can I do for you? Why are you Shanks's transponder? Roger questions, the snail making a curious look to match the captain tone. Well, something has come up and Shanks went running into a jungle, Ben responded back with a tiny chuckle and head shake. A loud boisterous laugh came from the snail. Wah! Well, that is Shanks for ya. Okay, what has come up to get my cabin boy so railed up he couldn't call me himself? Roger then asked Ben, his tone as cheerful as it always was, and Ben could slowly feel himself become slightly hesitant. After a good minute of silence from the other side of the transponder snail, Ben finally spoke up. Well, sir, I believe we found him, Ben said to Roger, his tone still hesitant but it held certainty in it. It was silent and for some reason Ben felt a little nervous. This was the Pirate King who wouldn't feel nervous around his impulsive but him, As in you mean, Roger couldn't even finish his sentence so Ben finished it for, yes, we found Ace, I've seen the kid with my own eyes. Definitely looks like you and Rouge, maybe more Rouge with her freckles, Ben told Roger calmly. Another wave of silence passes over the two. I'll be over there as soon as possible, Roger says to Ben, but before the guy could say anything else he heard the snail hanging up with a click. He huffs to himself, running a hand down his face. He really needs to talk to Rayleigh again, he would help with his sanity. Ben just hopes that Shanks is able to win over those 3 kids before Roger gets here. Oh wait, he forgot to tell him there's 3 of them. Looks like he'll need to get a hold of Rayleigh now. The first mate should be able to get Roger from doing anything stupid for now, he hopes. And tell Roger that he got 2 other kids to worry about. He saw how close those 3 were and he doubted they would go anywhere without each other seeing as all 3 of them had just disappeared. Ben got the other transponder snail, picking it up as he waited for Rayleigh to pick it up. Shanks can admit it that he might have been a bit over his head for thinking he could chase down those 3. They were surprisingly really fast. But if they really did live the way that Luffy had told him, he wouldn't be surprised they were as strong as Luffy explained to him. But even so, he was definitely lost in this jungle. The path he had been following before had disappeared and Shanks was pretty sure he had gone the exact opposite way he was trying to get. He didn't even know where that path led, but where it did lead it was obvious it might have led to the boys' home unless they were tricking him because they knew he would still follow them. They seemed like smart kids to do it as well. Damn it. Shanks muttered with an annoyed tone, pinching the bridge of his nose. This was so annoying. All of this because Ace recognized their Jolly Roger. Geez, he wonders what he must have heard to have such an intense reaction to them. Must have been pretty bad. He can't help but feel bad for Ace. He seems like a good kid, but he's an angry kid and aggressive. Makino had told him that Ace grew up with the mountain bandits that Luffy was staying with now. From time to time Dayton, the 3 boys' caretaker, always complains to Makino when she has the chance. Makino says that Dayton loves those boys more than she lets on, but they were all wild little brats, quote Dayton's words. He thinks anyone would be wild growing up like this. In Ace's case, growing up having to deal with hearing how much of a bad person his dad was. If he did know, then Shanks can assume a child would grow up being aggressive. Maybe even with a few issues as well. He seemed to be good with his brothers though. He let his guard down around the 2, and well, maybe Shanks had been a bit too hopeful that they'll have his hopes down enough that he could show the brothers his ship. Man, he wished it didn't have to turn out like this. Now he was drenched, cold, and his boots and pants were caked in mud. It was becoming very uncomfortable to walk now. Damn it. He should have waited till the storm passed. Makino has told him every time Luffy left to go back to his brothers in Mt. Kalubo that he knows where he was going and knows how to defend himself well enough. And yet it still gave him that uneasy feeling in his chest. The others were going to make fun of him so much when he got back down to Fusha village. Should he go back down? Maybe the boys needed to cool off for a moment after that whole situation back at the docks, and Shanks doubted he was getting anywhere in this type of rain, which has let up a little but not enough to safely make it up. Shanks lets a huff out as he runs a hand down his face. He needs some booze right now. He just hopes that when the captain gets here, he won't scare the poor buggers off. Sheet, I hope they don't get sick in this weather, Shanks says out loud with a concerned tone before turning back around to Fusha village. He needed someone that knew their way around this jungle, and that seemed to be Makino and Whoop Slap. They have visited the boys a few times if he remembered correctly. Roger, I think you may want to hear this, Rayleigh says to his rather idiotic captain that seemed very dead set on getting to the East Blues, which from where they were out would take a week, but this was Joe LD Roger. He was trying to make this sail a 3-day sail instead of a week. What is it? I'm kind of busy, Ray, Roger tells his first mate, trying to be all serious, but Rayleigh only raises a brow at his antics. Currently Roger was trying to take hold of the helm so he could, and Rayleigh quotes, show them how it's really done. Yeah, honestly, even for the past nearly 40 years, he still doesn't know how he let this idiot be his captain. Much less even get the title of Pirate King. Well, I just got off with Ben, he tells the stubborn fool, crossing his arms as he leans back against the railings of the Oro Jackson, and he wanted to just quickly inform that there's 3 of them. Rayleigh tells Roger bluntly as ever, depicting the man's change of emotions like it was a wave. First was confusion, more confusion, then happy when he realized, but then went to shock. Rouge had 3 kids? And he should have seen where this had been going. No, this was his fault, he should have phrased that better. Running a hand down his face, Rayleigh tries to keep himself at peace, which was already hard enough to do on any other usual day on this ship. No, she didn't. "'Tis Roger, your son has seemed to have found a pair of brothers," Rayleigh told Roger again for the man. Another second of silence passes. "Ace adopted 2 brothers of his own?" Roger then said with a head tilt. And you know what, that was good enough for Rayleigh because this ship did not have enough alcohol for him on board. "Yep, exactly right," his first mate says with a strained smile. And Roger can feel his smile growing wider by the second. 2 other boys, huh? That means 2 more sons of his that he needs to make up for lost time. He can already feel a laugh bubbling up inside his chest. This was wonderful. Then we better not waste any more time. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "To the east, blue, Dawn Island." He shouted with his signature smile. Rayleigh can only hope the captain's son wasn't as much as a mindless oaf that acts purely on instinct and intrusive and impulsive thoughts. 'Cause that would be a recipe for disaster. But even then, hearing Roger's boisterous laugh drown out the sounds of the waves crashing and wind blowing around them doesn't help but tug a small hidden smile on Rayleigh's lips. The sun has never shone brighter, he believes, and it might continue to grow brighter when those brats are finally aboard the Oro Jackson. "Oh dear," Makino says with a shocked expression, her hand covering her mouth from her shock. Shanks had just come back down after he had been trying to make his way up Mt. Kalubo. It wasn't the first time someone has gotten lost in that massive and dense jungle, but the state the man came back in surprised the barmaid. The man was drenched head to toe from the harsh rains, sticks and leaves in his hair, mud staining his white button-up shirt and his black pants. Boots were definitely covered inside and out with mud. The red-haired man looked like he had been running around wild in the jungle. But even then it doesn't stop an amused smile tugging on the corners of Makino's lips. My, Shanks, I heard you had just taken off running when the storm started to come in," Makino says with her usual soft and amused tone, coming from behind the bar counter, not before picking up a towel that she keeps just in case one of the boys came in as dirty as Shanks was now. "What happened?" she asked him. That motherly tone of hers was always something that got to everyone, even pirates like Shanks. Saying that, the red-haired lets out a long, dreary and exhausted tone, grabbing the towel from Makino with a quiet, "Thanks." "Well, Ace realized we were the Roger pirates," Shanks started with, and he saw the way Makino grimaced slightly when he said that, and assuming you know how he would have reacted to that, he went full-blown hostile on me with Sabo siding with him, Shanks continued on, using the towel to dry his hair. Setting himself onto one of the empty chairs in the now empty bar, Shanks lets his body go full relax, winding down from everything. "And Anchor now hates me," he said quietly, his tone absolutely devastated. Eyes flickered to the ground. "Thought I was going to abandon him," Shanks croaked out with a grim look. Was his eyes stinging right now? It felt like it. He hoped he wasn't going to cry. He hears Makino hum to his words, then her kind, gentle hands rest on top of his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Shanks, I should have known this might have happened," Makino says, diverting her eyes away for a moment as she thought about something. "Ace has hated the Roger pirates for a long time, and I probably should have known better than thinking he wouldn't lash out when he meets you and see how good you are," Makino tells Shanks with a slightly disappointed sigh. Her hand moved back to her lap, pulling a chair out to sit face to face with Shanks. "And I should have guessed he would have tried to get Luffy away from you as soon as he realized who you were," Makino said with a gentle headshake, a frown appearing on her face. Makino knows that Ace was a good boy. He was such a sweetheart to those he let close, like herself. But she also knew that the boy could be destructive, even for someone as young as Ace himself. She has gotten the boy to open up to her on multiple accounts. The boy needed to open up, and Makino was always there for him. It was during one of those moments that Ace had finally let Makino know what goes inside that little mind of his. And she doesn't believe she has ever been more heartbroken before by his words. Ace was just a kid with a deep passion to become great, but was filled with so much self-worth issues, blaming himself for everything that was never his fault. His brothers were the only real good thing Ace had going for him, even if Makino had told him otherwise. So she wasn't surprised that Ace would try and break Luffy and Shanks up because he saw the redhead as a threat. So then I'm guessing you know his father is the Pirate King, Makino says to Shanks. The redhead replied with a nod and she found herself sighing softly. Don't blame Ace, he troubled. All he wants is to protect the last two good things in his life, Makino says to Shanks, looking up at Shanks with a glint of desperation in her eyes. She didn't want the man to blame poor Ace for trying to break him and Luffy up. I know that what he probably said could leave a lasting impact on yours and Lou's relationship, Makino then acknowledged. But when Ace comes around, he'll apologize for what he said and he'll probably actually thank you for saving Luffy, Makino told Shanks, giving him a warm and hopeful smile. Shanks for a second didn't believe it. A child like Ace could potentially always lash out like that, especially when they get into their adult years. But if Makino is saying that Ace will come around then, the boy will come around, she was always hopeful like that and wise too. He just hoped sooner than later. Roger, do not ignore me. Damn it, Roger. I know you can hear me. Rayleigh yelled from the other side of the door from the captain's cabin. Damn it, of course this big man-child would lock himself in his own room because he knew he would get his butt beat. He could faintly hear childish sulking noises coming from the other side and Rayleigh finds himself sighing and wishing he hadn't binged all the booze and sake and whatever alcoholic drinks they had on board. He was too old to deal with his captain's childish outburst. Come on, Roger, don't you think you're a bit too old to be doing this? Rayleigh says with a strained tone. If his hair weren't already gray then it definitely is right now. No. Rayleigh hears back in response and he couldn't believe he had actually found himself thinking that a mini Roger on board would be good. No, it wouldn't. He was hoping the boy turned out more like Rouge at this point. If he was anything like his father then he was retiring no matter what Roger had to say about it. He can't handle two Rogers on the ship. Well though because of Roger's little stunt he pulled with the Oro Jackson, they have made it to the East Blues within a day. Yes, a day. And the ship was badly damaged because of the stupid stunt their dimwit of a captain pulled. Hence why Roger had hid himself away before Rayleigh could find him. Okay then, well just letting you know we'll be at Dawn Island within a few hours, Rayleigh says calmly, taking a breath for a moment. And during those couple of hours I will, and trust me Roger, I will make sure you suffer the consequences for damaging the ship, he said kindly before he was on his heels and turning away from the captain's cabin. Maybe he could find some alcohol in the infirmary. Looking up at the sky, the gloomy, dark rain clouds that had been lingering up around there were gone and replaced with a more lighter grayish color now. The rain had stopped a while ago as well. But they still couldn't find Luffy anywhere. From where Ace and Sabo had fallen they hadn't been too far away from the way to Dayton's place. But even then, Luffy was nowhere to be seen anywhere within the vicinity. They were wondering if the now rubber boy had bounced off to the other side of the jungle with how bouncy his body could be. That was a worrying thought though. They never really go to the other side of Mt. Kalubo that much. It's mostly where all the larger beasts tend to stay during hibernation. Just thinking about their little brother being on that side of the jungle, practically in the den for all those beasts to take as a snack. Okay, this is fine, Sabo says with a strained calm smile. He was just trying not to panic because then Ace would panic as well. They had made it back to Dayton's, forced into the barrel of warm water after Dayton had seen what a mess they had been, muttering something about not playing in the goddamn mud. Now here they were dressed in fresh clothes, clean and bandaged up from the rough tumble down the slope. Were they content? Not at all. Not when Luffy was out there all alone. Luffy knew his way around the jungle. He always went exploring so he tends to memorize where things were, but even then he should have been back a long time ago. Ace couldn't believe they were just waiting here in the bandits' hut for Luffy who was clearly lost. It was going to be dark soon and they would rather not have Luffy out there by himself while it was dark, cold and he can't see anything to protect himself. He didn't like this feeling. He should be out there looking for Luffy, not here warm, clean and bandaged up while his little brother that deserves this treatment more than he does was out there in the dark, cold and probably starving out of his mind. They both hope he doesn't go eating some random mushrooms again. Damn it, Ace muttered, his face in his hands. He didn't like this waiting. Hell, he hasn't even touched any of the meat in front of him. Luffy should be here eating it instead. And by the looks of it, Sabo was maybe thinking the same, he hadn't touched his food at all either and kept glancing to the door of the hut, waiting and waiting. They were both getting fidgety and restless. Where was their little brother? Their son? Sunshine even, it was getting colder without Luffy around, running his loud mouth all over, doing his usual idiotic stunts that got both Sabo and Ace laughing and Dayton mad. Calm down you brats, you need your rest, Dayton says, appearing from behind the two brats making them jump slightly. They hadn't even realized she was there, they didn't even smell the scent of her cigarettes. She has been watching the two fidget and shift every goddamn second. It was annoying. Dogra and Magra are out there with Pochi looking for the other Dinin brat. Dayton reassures the boys even though she might seem annoyed by this. She too had been only a little concerned for the younger boy. That was only because Garp would have her, but if anything happened to his grandson, nothing more than that, not like she even cared about these brats who have invaded her home. Ace only gives Dayton a cold look of distrust before turning his head back to the door. Sabo himself had sighed, saying nothing but gave Dayton a weak nod in response. The curly-haired lady found herself shocked at their very minimal amount of whatever they did. She was silent for a moment before she scoffed at the lack of a reaction with scowl. Her cigarettes were already piling up in the ash tin the longer this brat took to get back. At least eat something, Dayton then tries with the boys, sitting down in front of them, pushing their still untouched plates of food to them. The both of them looked at the food, Ace with a blank look before he was scowling at himself again. "I'll wait for Luffy," the raven-haired one muttered under his brother, arms resting on his knees while his head rested on his arms. Sabo himself sighed, looking back to the door. "I'm not hungry right now," he told Dayton with a quiet voice, pushing the plate away. Now this was genuinely concerning. The both of them refusing to eat? These bottomless pits refusing food? All because Luffy had gone missing. They were scared. Dayton can see that. The twins in this state were easy to read, even Ace for a change. They were worried, concerned and fearing for the worst of their little brother. Damn it. Dayton found herself muttering under her breath with her brows furrowing with irritation. "You brats know how to make me gray early," Dayton says with a head shake as she gets up from the ground. After that their eyes don't leave the door. Even when Magra, Dogra and Pochi come back, not when they were both forced to stay at the hut, not when the bandits all go to sleep. They stay there sitting and waiting for their brother to return. Ace keeps telling himself that Luffy would come back. The kid always came back before. Ace had left him to get eaten, dropped into a ravine, nearly crushed by trees and rock slides. Luffy always returned right back to Ace with a beaming smile on his face despite his injuries. There was no sun right now, the moon was out by its lonesome, its brightness only reflects off the sun's own radiation. And the stars were not bright enough to reflect their own light off the moon. The moon was out now. Any light or warmth from whatever little bits the sun could give hidden within those clouds were gone now. So were the clouds. Luffy pouted slightly when he looked up. He was supposed to be back with his brothers right now, but he has no idea where he was. He hopes he doesn't get teased for getting lost in the jungle. But he really doesn't know where it happened or how he ended up there in the first place. "I'm hungry," Luffy exclaimed childishly loud, stomping his feet as he walked. He's been walking for forever now, he was sick and tired of it. He's cold, shivering, covered uncomfortably in now dried dirt, and his clothes still haven't been able to dry, which just makes him colder. Face flushed red from his own frustration, biting his lip as he tried to will his tears away. They stung and he didn't want to cry here. "Ace! Sabo!" Luffy called out for his brothers again. They'd probably call him an idiot or a moron for yelling like this, tell him something about waking up the beasts in the jungle and making them grumpy, like how Ace is whenever he or Sabo try to wake him up after he randomly falls asleep. They'll try and scare him too by making him out to be a little snack for the beasts. But Luffy doubts they would like the taste of rubber, he already tried before. His sandals were gone, or they have been gone for a while now. They came off when he was rolling down and he can't find them either. This was so annoying. How many things was he going to lose before he finally gets back? Well, at least he still has his straw hat from Shanks. It dried much quicker than his clothes, so he was wearing it right now. Thanks. Was he really going to leave Luffy like that? Had he really been planning on leaving for good? Shanks told him he would always come back to visit though. Were you going to come back after this adventure of yours? Those words ringed through his head. Ace had said them and it had made Shanks go quiet. He never went like that before, and Luffy wasn't that dumb, but he knew people. He knew at that moment Shanks was hesitating. He was the most fearless pirate Luffy knew, and he had hesitated, and to others he had a blank look, but Luffy could see the guilt worming into the older man's expression. He was going to leave Luffy, break their promise, and break his heart as well. Tears started to drop from his cheeks by their own will now. Luffy couldn't stop them. No, no, Luffy whispered to himself, a frown tugging at his lips even as he tried to stop it, face scrunched up now. He stopped walking a little while ago. His feet were hurting, thanks to his new rubberness. The rocks, twigs, and sharp things on the ground didn't piece his feet as he walked. They were aching though, his whole body ached and his head hurt too. It had been bleeding, not anymore, but Luffy saw the dried blood when he looked into a river. Angs, Luffy sobbed out, more cries and sobs bubbled up in his throat. It was feeling restricting and tightening. Luffy didn't like this feeling. He didn't like being restricted. When did he fall to his knees? The pain in his knees had only registered in his head now. His face was wet as well. Why was it wet? Why was his vision blurry? And his eyes sting? Why was everything weird now? When did it feel too close together and yet he felt too right out in the open? Nothing was here right now, it was just him. That thought scared Luffy to the core. He was alone, he was all alone. In the dark, cold, hurting right now. His brothers, where were they? They can't leave him alone like this. He needed his brother. They can't abandon him too. A wail ripped out of Luffy's throat. His chest was feeling restricted too. It was tightening up on him. It aches, it hurts. Sabo and Ace would make it better. They can make it better, they always do. The tears were non-stop. They were falling and falling, flooding his red, pudgy, swollen face now. Snot was also dripping out. He couldn't move. Why? Why was he so stuck? When did his throat start burning from his quickened breathing? When he starts wheezing from his short breathing? His body was trembling, his eyes were wide and alert, and yet his body wasn't, his mind wasn't. Funny, not the good kind. This wasn't fun. He wanted Sabo and Ace with him. He needs his brother. They can ease this pain. Luffy let out rapid breaths, all sharp and shallow. The cold air entered in and out, pricking his throat and lungs painfully. It makes Luffy coughs painfully, gagging on his own cries and wails. I'm alone, wailed the small crying boy, trembling and shaking. His own hand around his throat, clawing at it as if he could take the tightness and restricted feeling away. Choked out coughs, gagging, cries and wails could be heard all within a 20-meter radius of the spiky raven-haired boy. His small body spasmed and jerked without his consent. Something was pulling at his hair, but the pain wasn't registering in his head. Luffy he needed to be free of this. He doesn't want to feel like this anymore. He hated this. He never wants to feel like this again. Ragged, exhausted and trembling breaths escaped from Luffy. He was looking up at the sky. There was a clearing in the treetops. The moon smacked right in the dead center and the stars twinkled brightly. So did the moon. The boy doesn't know how much time has passed. He doesn't know how long he was like that. The feeling of restriction in his throat and chest, it was like someone had been tying him up with a rope and didn't leave any wiggle room. Did he black out? Sabo had told him about that once, but Luffy doesn't remember. One moment he had just been walking, next he thought about Shanks, then he had ended up on his knees somehow. Now he was looking up, staring at the moon and stars with wide, watery eyes. It was cold, so cold. But it was pretty, really pretty. Luffy thought it was really pretty. They were cold and yet they were warm and soft-looking, nothing compared to the sharp pains of the coldness. The stars twinkled warmly with their own soft lights. The moon, it was big and shone just as much as the sun, Luffy thinks. The light it poured down was soft and gentle. It may not give warmth, but the intention was there. He is sleepy now. Luffy hopes Ace and Sabo don't mind that he slept here tonight. A small thud was heard when a rubbery boy hit the ground. Curling in on himself for warmth, the thought of his brothers being here, cuddled up together, was enough to warm the boy's aching heart. Sun trickled in through exposed gaps of the door. emitting a light warm enough to warm the two restless sleeping boys. And for a moment they thought Luffy was back. "What's with that grumpy look?" The freckled-covered boy jolted awake at the sound of Luffy's voice, startling his sleeping twin that had been laying against him. Hush. His relief and joy was quickly well-lived when he realized that there was no Luffy anywhere to be found in front of him. Turning his head and body around to look around the hut for that little bubbling ball of energy. No, he wasn't here. That hadn't been Luffy. The blanket that had been draped over him had fallen off his frame. Sabo lifted his head up from Ace, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. "Luffy is back?" Sabo asks with a hopeful tone, a smile appearing, but that was also short-lived. "No," Ace mumbled to Sabo, his own tone holding disappointment. Sabo straightened himself out, back letting out pops and cracks that have been dying to be cracked, relieved his back was finally stretched out from that uncomfortable position he and Ace had fallen asleep in. Sabo looked back at the door that was filtering in the warm rays of the sun. "It feels like a nice day out." Silence filled the room, except for the bandits' snores and quiet sleeping noises otherwise. Soon their stomachs roared at them in anger, demanding they be fed, pinching in pain from the lack of food. Sabo looked behind him and Ace, pulling the plates of food over from last night. It was cold for sure, but it was only a couple of hours, still edible. Sabo picked up some meat and started shoving food into his mouth. He never goes without food for that long. Him, Ace and Luffy never do. They were always out hunting for food, enough of it to eat more than a grown adult. He ate and ate till his stomach was finally satisfied with its fill for the day. The blonde had been so hungry he hadn't even realized Ace didn't touch a single thing on his plate. He knows Ace was also starving, but he was looking at the food like it had personally offended him. "Aren't you going to eat?" Sabo asks Ace with a raised brow, wiping his mouth clean from any mess of food. His twin just glares blankly at the plate of food. He was back in that position, arms on his knees and head in his arms. "I'm not eating until we find Luffy. I'll eat when he does," Ace grumbles out lowly, looking away from the food, resisting any temptations of it. "That was the first." Sabo shakes his head. "No, you're eating now," he demands Ace, which directs his glare from the food to his twin now. "It's fine, Sabo. I can eat later with Luffy," he grunted out again. A moment passed before Sabo was wrestling him over. "Sabo?" Ace squawked out with surprise. "What the hell? Get off me!" He yelled at the blonde, uncaring if he woke any of the sleeping bandits. "Not until you eat something." Sabo yelled right back at Ace, sitting on the freckled boy. Ace grunted and tried to push Sabo off him, but his stomach disagreed with him, making sharp pains. Ace bit his lip, a scowl already forming on his lips. "Damn it, Sabo, there's no time for this. We need..." Ace was cut off before he could even finish his sentence before Sabo had shoved a spoonful of rice and meat down his mouth. The boy choked slightly at first, but his mouth salivated at the taste of food and he couldn't stop himself from swallowing it down. When the spoon left his mouth, Ace took a few moments to process what Sabo was doing before his face was flushing red with embarrassment. That dimbin the spoon feeding him like was some child. Uba. Cut off once again when another spoonful of food was shoved in his mouth. Once again his mouth moved on its own, chewing on the food before swallowing. It happened a couple more times before Ace finally learned to keep his mouth firmly shut. Now Sabo was getting irritated. "Just eat already, you've had more than 5 spoonfuls of food, you might as well just eat," Sabo said to Ace with an annoyed tone. Ace's response: a sharp glare and an even sharper headshake. Sabo let an annoyed huffed-out sigh. Running a hand over his face, he thinks Ace is being childish right now, but he doesn't say that. "You can't even push me off with how hungry you are," Sabo tells Ace, leading to the boy frowning harder at his twin. "Yes, I can." Ace snapped, this time finally finishing his sentence before another spoonful of food was shoved in his mouth. Annoyedly, Ace glared at Sabo as he ate the food. Sabo glares back at Ace. "No, you can't, because of how hungry you are, you need to eat more than me," Sabo continues. This time Ace stays quiet. "How can you expect yourself to protect Luffy or me if you can't even push me off you because you decided to starve yourself?" The words of the blonde shocked Ace, maybe to his core. looking up at Sabo with wide and surprised eyes. What if you needed to protect Luffy from something when we found him but you couldn't because you were weaker than usual because you starved yourself? Sabo continued. His tone was firm but it was not harsh, it carried worry for his twin. Sabo was met with silence again. Picking up another spoonful of the food off Ace's plate. I wouldn't be happy, Luffy wouldn't be happy if you did that, Sabo says more softly this time. No, that little black-haired boy with all his warmth wouldn't like that at all. You want to be strong to protect us? Sabo asks Ace but he doesn't expect an answer back from the freckled-covered boy. Then let us take care of you this way, take care of yourself so you can protect us. Ace stared up at his twin, eyes wide with shock but other than that, Sabo doesn't know what was going through his head. His lips ever so slightly parted from the surprise of Sabo's words, so Sabo took the opportunity to press another spoonful of food into Ace's mouth. This time Ace lets himself subconsciously take the food from the spoon, eating it slower than he has ever eaten food before. A moment passes over the two when Ace swallows the spoonful of food. Then quietly Sabo hears something coming from Ace. Fine, whatever you eat, the freckled-covered boy whispers to the blonde. Get off me, he demanded Sabo quickly. Sabo narrows his eyes on Ace, trying to detect any lies coming from him. But he got off without any problems after that, handing the spoon back over to Ace who snatched it from Sabo with a quiet embarrassed grumble. It doesn't take Ace long to go back to his usual, devouring the food twice as fast as Sabo had, leaving not a single grain of food behind. Wow, he must have taken what Sabo said seriously. Don't tell anyone what happened, Ace then says to Sabo with a glare, but Sabo just gives Ace a sly smile. I make no promises, Sabo snickers out, getting up from the wooden ground when Ace starts to yell at him. In the process they startled the bandits awake. Both boys ran around for a bit, Ace chasing a laughing and giggling Sabo. Once the door opened, letting in the full burst of the sun-blinding brightness, making each of the bandits groan in dismay at being awoken like this. While the two boys basked in the sun's warm rays of sunshine, jumping over a startled Dayton who had been sitting out in the front all night long. They laughed and ran as they heard Dayton's annoyed and angry yells. Hey you brats! Where the hell do you think you're going? She shouted at the boys, standing up from where she had been sitting. It was no use, Diamond kids ran away once again. But it wasn't like Dayton even needed to ask them where they were going. They were looking for Luffy obviously. Tease, good luck brats, Dayton mumbled out, lighting another cigarette before walking back inside the hut. Roger? Shanks had just gotten out of bed, currently early in the afternoon right now, doing his usual routine. He had come up to the deck and in all its glory there was the one and only Oro Jackson. They had only informed the captain only a day and a couple of hours ago. He knew Roger was the man that didn't like waiting but he didn't expect it to take this much time for them to show up. Shanks. My boy, how have you been? Roger shouts back out to Shanks with his usual cheery tone, despite the two obviously large bumps swelling from his head and Rayleigh standing next to him with a content look. Oh by the seas, this was going to be a long, long day for them all, isn't it? Shanks finds himself letting out an amused huff. He wonders how Ace would react to seeing his dad in the flesh, probably not any better than how he had reacted to Shanks. The Oro Jackson had docked in the harbor of the small village of Dawn Island. So this was Fusha Village then? It was peaceful here. Rayleigh wouldn't mind retiring here as long as there was booze or some kind of entertainment around, like a casino perhaps. But Roger didn't seem to have the same thoughts. What a boring place. From what I heard there's supposed to be huge animals, bigger than the normal ones, Roger says. He and Rayleigh walk with each other. Shanks besides them as well. All the villagers kept their distance. Actually more than distance, they stayed rightfully away from the Roger pirates. Who wouldn't? This was the captain of the Roger pirates, the one and only pirate king of the great pirate era. You're just an adrenaline junkie, Roger, Rayleigh says to his captain, looking around at the structures. It was, though boring, a fisherman's village, he guesses. Shanks led the two older men to the party bar which was empty, except for Makino with an amused smile. The green-haired barmaid had just been wiping down the tables in the bar before she looked up when she heard the doors being opened. Oh Shanks, didn't think I'd catch you up this late in the morning, Makino says to Shanks, that usual soft tone of hers, looking to Shanks's side, seeing the other two very well-known males. "And you brought more friends, hmm?" she says with a happy tone as she clasps her hands together, walking up to the three pirates without a single worry. Shanks only found himself smiling back at Makino. "You can say that," he said to the lady. "This is my captain and his first mate." Shanks started before Makino quickly finished it for him. "Yes, D. Roger and Silver's Rayleigh," she says with a nod. She looks up at the two very tall males with a warm and welcoming smile, something they don't usually get all the time. "Welcome to my party bar. It's always nice to hold more of Shanks's friends." Makino welcomes the two, moving back. "Can I get you two anything?" she asks the two of them, moving behind the bar counter. And Rayleigh was very quick to take up the offer. "Rum, please," Rayleigh says, quickly taking a seat at the bar counter. Roger sits beside his oldest friend with a warm and bright smile on his face. "I like you very much, miss," Roger says to Makino loudly, making the young lady laugh slightly. "Why, thank you. And where are my manners? I'm Makino, by the way," she introduces herself, placing a bottle of rum right in front of Rayleigh. She then looks back over to Shanks, who stood by the entrance of the party bar, seeming in thought, probably wondering how he would go over telling Roger that his own son has a very strong dislike for him. Makino sighs softly but looks back at the other two. "So I've heard you're looking for 1, 2, or 3 boys?" Makino then asks Roger with a curious tone despite already knowing. There wasn't much that Shanks could keep hidden from her. Roger's eyes lit up immediately like an excited little puppy. He looks a lot like Luffy, Makino decided. "Ah, yes, we are in fact looking for 3 boys. Have you seen them?" Roger asks Makino with an excited kind of tone for a man his age. Rayleigh can only shake his head as Roger goes off. The man gives no context, but he believes this woman knows what they were doing here. Makino nodded softly with a smile. "I have. The 3 rascals come down from time to time, but not that often," she tells Roger, moving around behind the bar, seeming to be busy herself. "So they don't live in the village? Do they not live here in the village?" Rayleigh asks Makino with a raised brow, pouring some of the rum into his empty flask. Makino nods to Rayleigh's words. "No, they do not live here. They live in Mt. Kalubo with the mountain bandits there," Makino informs the 2 pirates, glancing over to Shanks, who was looking only slightly nervous. "Mountain bandits?" Roger says with a raised brow. His son has been raised by a couple of mountain bandits? Just who dropped his son off here and with bandits? "Yes, the Dayton family. Rest assured they are doing more than okay with them," Makino reassures Roger before the Pirate King could get any thoughts. "They're a lively bunch of boys, always doing something," Makino then hums out. "Lively bunch?" That was good then in Roger's books. His boys would of course have an adventurous type of spirit if they were his boys. "What are their names?" Rayleigh then asked. They knew Ace was Ace, seeing if Rouge stayed true to the names her and Roger picked out, and for a girl and Ace for a boy. "Ace, Sabo and Luffy," Makino says, passing another bottle of rum to Rayleigh as she tells them. "Sabo and Luffy? Rather unique names, Oh well, only the best for his boys anyways. Ace and Sabo are twins. Luffy is the youngest." Makino also mentions twins? Or well, they are self-proclaimed twins. They are 3 months apart actually, Makino then remembered before shrugging. Makes sense, somewhat sense, Rayleigh guesses. "So where can we find them?" Roger asks Makino, and there it was, the elephant in the room finally getting addressed because Rayleigh doesn't think he has seen Shanks this quiet before. Makino too was silent, almost hesitant, placing down a cup that she had been drying. "Well, there is a path up to the bandits' hut, but do please refrain from going up there for now," Makino then asks Roger. She knows Rayleigh would listen to her. But if the Pirate King was anything like the Luffy she knows, then they all know how that'll end up. "Yesterday, the boys seem to have had some problems," Makino says as gently as one possible could, looking over to Shanks, who sighs but comes over, taking a seat beside Roger. He looked nervous, having to be the bearer of bad news. "Yes, it seems Ace and Sabo aren't too fond of us," Shanks started off with, quickly grabbing the glass of sake the Makino pushes to the red-haired. Of course, Rayleigh should have seen this coming. They never get anything easy. Roger himself only tilts his head slightly. "They don't like pirates?" he says with an anxious tone. His own sons? Didn't like pirates. How would they be pirates, though? Shanks grimaced slightly. Not exactly, they would love to be pirates, he tells Roger to his relief, thank the seas for that. But Ace and Sabo, mostly Ace, seem to have a rather strong dislike for us in particular, Shanks tells his captain, trying to keep his smile on his face. Well, Rayleigh guesses that's understandable. They weren't talked about as the nicest people on the seas by the world government. Of course, but those two will see, Roger says without a worry, which only meant he wasn't understanding the situation. Makino can see that Roger was happy, more than happy to see his son for the first time ever with two other boys. But he had to understand what Ace felt about him. Roger, Makino says softly to the pirate captain, does not like the, she says very slowly and clearly for him to understand. She can only hope he doesn't have explosive outbursts like Ace. A moment of silence passes through the bar. What? Roger then says, his tone no longer holding its cheerfulness anymore. Rayleigh looks at his captain with his own concerned look. That was definitely not something he would want to hear after looking for his kid for the past 10 years, only to hear that his son hated him, and by the look on Shanks's and Makino's faces. Ace probably hated Roger right to the core. Well, that seems to be a problem, but no worries, as soon as he realizes I'm completely different from how the articles talk about me, then he'll see, both him and Sabo, Roger says, quickly picking himself back up, a smile on his face again, only looking slightly restrained. Rayleigh can see how restless Roger was getting now. His eyes narrowed on the man. Roger, Rayleigh said with a tired but stern tone, like he was talking to some naughty toddler, how about we do what Makino says and wait, Rayleigh suggests to Roger. But the man was already up and out. This DM an idiot. Well, that went well, Shanks then says, downing the rest of his bottle with Rayleigh doing the exact same thing. He couldn't stay sober for this. Makino shakes her head softly like a disappointed mother, hands on her hips and everything. He's just like Luffy, knew it from when I saw that smile, Makino then says with a quiet chuckle. Taking the empty bottles. Say, mind telling me more about the boys before I have to go chasing that big oaf? Rayleigh then asks Makino, flashing her a kind smile. And Makino was more than happy to oblige. They've been out here ever since morning now. And Luffy still wasn't appearing anywhere. It was making both Sabo and Ace really worried now. Did he get eaten by one of the mountain beasts finally? Because his older brothers weren't there to pull him out? Damn it! Ace shouted with frustration, his fist colliding with one of the trees, creating a rather impressive dent in it for a 10-year-old. Sabo found himself huffing. How could they just lose Luffy like that? He could have sworn they had all been falling in the same direction as each other. How could he and Ace stay together while Luffy got separated from them? Okay, he's nowhere anywhere close to Dayton's or the treehouse, Sabo then finally says. That I think he may have gotten to another part of the jungle, Sabo says to Ace, taking his top hat off to run a hand through his short curly hair. Ace let out an annoyed sigh, before he was kicking the tree just as hard as his punch, causing the tree to break and go tumbling down. The action made Sabo jump slightly. They needed to find a better way for Ace to handle his anger. Come on, let's go back to Dayton's, we can start over from there, Sabo suggested to Ace. Already turning back around to the directions of the bandits' hut. Ace glared out harder out to the jungle before reluctantly following his twin. He just couldn't believe that Luffy could go missing like this. He was a loud kid always creating chaos somewhere. How could his own brothers not find him? How could Ace not find him? It was a quiet walk. Normally Luffy would be beside them or trailing behind his brother. He would be filling that void of silence with his voice, talking about everything and anything with the childish innocence to him. Something that Ace and Sabo try so hard to desperately keep untouched by anything. As they approached Dayton's, they could hear people talking. Well, of course they heard talking. There were like 20 bandits or something, but it wasn't the usual chatter. They could hear Dayton's voice and someone else? Could someone from Fusha or Terminal Gray be visiting? The twins glanced at each other before giving a nod to one another. Quietly they stalked their way up to the bandits' hut. Hiding off to the side behind a tree, they peeked out from the side, eye narrowing on the scene in front of them. It was Dayton and the bandits talking to someone, but not someone they were familiar with. He was a tall guy, like really tall. He looked like a pirate from behind, had black hair just like Ace and Luffy. Could be another person from Shanks's crew. If so, then Ace would gladly beat the guys, but he told Shanks not to follow them. But if it weren't for Sabo holding him back, he would already be beating the guy black and blue. The guy and Dayton seemed to be talking about something serious. Whoever this person was, they were definitely intimidating Dayton and the other bandits. Ace could feel his blood slowly rise. I'm telling you, even if I wanted to, I can't. They aren't here right now, Dayton tells the guy, her tone slightly afraid, but she keeps her composure as she speaks. Then where can I find them? The guy asks. His voice was deep and, well, it was hard to put because it sounded slightly familiar. I don't know, those brats are always out and about, Dayton says as she crosses her arms. Brats? Were they talking about him, Sabo and Luffy? Who did they piss us off this time? Even if I did know, no way would I tell you. I would rather not have Garp on my, but Dayton then quickly added before anything else. Just who was this person? Sure, they knew Dayton was a SCK up, but she wasn't easily that afraid of people, only people like Garp. He was a senile old man. Garp? The man shouts out with surprise. That old fool has had my son? The guy says, and Ace feels his heart completely drop to his stomach. Please tell him this was just probably Luffy's dad, please. They sounded nearly the exact same in personality. Please, not his dad. I don't know. I know nothing. All Garp did was dump the kid on me, so I have raised him and nothing else. Dayton says quickly, as nervous as she was. She tried to stand confidently. There was silence and something changed about the man's demeanor. Where is my son, Ace, and his brothers? The man finally demanded Dayton, his tone serious, more so than before. It made himself sound like he was only being playful before. But that wasn't the thing that got to Ace. No, it was the fact that the king of the pirates was standing right here in all his glory, in front of some mountain bandit's hut, demanding his son and his brothers. Like hell, that BSRD had no right to call Ace his son. Ace, no! Sabo yelled at his brother, who had completely lost it, running out from behind the tree. Sabo tried stopping him, but alas, Ace was always the stronger and faster one out of them. You BSRD! Ace shouted out loud, his tone furious like it never was before, jumping at the man with the tree branch he had been using as a temporary replacement for his metal pipe. Ace was faster, but the Pirate King was faster. He was already turned around when Ace jumped at him, grabbing the tree branch first, then Ace's tank top from behind, leaving the furious boy dangling in the air. Ace angrily kicked and thrashed in the man's hold, hissing at him angrily like some feral cat. You don't get to call me that. Ace lashed out to Roger, his hands trying to claw at the hand that was holding onto his shirt. Trying to kick the man, his legs were too short to do so from how far Roger was holding him away. He didn't say anything, only stared at Ace with wide awe at Ace. Not the expression Ace had thought the guy would have, but that was his problem right now. The guy didn't even seem to react all too much to Ace's words or insults, like they didn't reach his ears at all. Oh, by the seas, Roger then finally spoke. His voice was quiet and held this adoration or something that deeply unsettled Ace. Look at you, my boy. God, you look so beautiful, just like your mother, Roger says to Ace, which finally gets Ace to stop thrashing around and stunned into silence. A moment of silence passes. Sabo stands there in front of the duo, surprised that Ace was quickly stunned to silence, but well, the world's most horrible, evil and sadistic man, the Pirate King, had just complimented Ace so sweetly even when he had been acting like a feral cat just then. A red flush covered Ace's face, another massive scowl tugged on his lips. You BSRD. Then finally Roger had seemed to have made the mistake of taking a closer look at Ace because his face collided with Ace's fist instead, which effectively dropped Ace to the ground. He stumbled back to Sabo, putting himself in front of the blind boy protectively. That action stunned everyone, Sabo, Dayton, the bandits, and even Roger himself. After a heavy PRD pause, a laugh started to erupt from Roger, and he was throwing his head back like Ace had just told the world's funniest joke or some shit. Wah! Roger laughed out loud. A wide, massive smile took up most of his face. It unsettled the two boys because that was the same smile Luffy had. That was Luffy's smile. What the hell are you laughing at, you Bisudi? Ace yelled at the man with a death glare, snapping at him easily. My son, my little boy, Roger says, making Ace's scowl bigger. I'm not your boy, I'm not your demon's son. Ace gritted at Roger, but the man didn't even seem to notice. He failed to notice all the hatred in Ace's expression. Roger chuckles some more. I knew you'd be just like your mum. What a woman she was with that same fiery spirit as you, Roger says to Ace. The boy's eyes softened for a split second at the mention of his mum before his glare was hardening again. But you have the strength of your old man, Roger says with a prideful tone, and that only fuels Ace's anger. Damn it, can't you hear me? I'm not your demon BSTRD son. Ace shouted at Roger, which seemed to actually get through the man's thick skull. He quieted and his smile dropped slightly more softer now. This wasn't the reaction Ace had been looking for. No, none of this was what he had been looking for. Two of his greatest nightmares were becoming true, and that was losing one of his brothers and meeting his BSTRD sperm donor. You shouldn't say that about yourself, Ace, Roger says, softly this time, something none of them knew this guy was capable of. He wasn't even mocking Ace, he looked like he genuinely meant it. I heard from Makino you don't like me, Roger then started. But Ace took lead here. No, I don't not like you, Ace says with a strained tone. I think despise you, he whimpered to Roger, more quieter than he that thought he would be. Ace picked up a stone off the ground, raising his fist that held the rock up, ready to hit Roger at any moment. I want nothing to do with you, I want nothing from you, Ace gritted out, his fist tightly closing around the rock. Roger's expression faltered for a moment to that of a heartbroken look, but he quickly composed himself. Ace. Roger tries again but is stopped by Ace. He shouted at Roger, his teeth gritting now. He doesn't get to act like a worried parent now, not when he left his mother to die alone and for Ace to grow up alone. I'm not your goddamn son, I am not. Ace, my name is Portgas D Rouge, and I am Rouge's son that she had with a effing this is like you. Ace snapped, his foot stomping down on the ground roughly. He panted slightly. Ace, he doesn't know what to feel in this moment because the look on that sick BSTRD face wasn't what he was looking for. No, he didn't want him looking like an absolutely heartbroken parent. He wasn't his dad. And yet why is he here now, calling Ace his son? His boy. Why was he doing this now? Why did he finally come to Ace after all these years? Why didn't he come here sooner if he wanted to play father so much? But no, Roger had left out to the seas, leaving his heavily pregnant wife with already complications to deal with, trying not to get caught by Marines and having to die birthing the BSTRD son of the man that left her. A ragged breath left Ace in the moment. Looking away from the heartbroken look Roger was giving him, he doesn't want to see it, he doesn't want any excuses from that man. The bandits were looking at Ace in shock as well. Not all of them had known Ace's biological dad had been the Pirate King, and to hear a kid talk to the man himself like that. Oh, if only they weren't already scared for their lives, they'd probably stand up for the kid. But not to the King of Pirates. Ace, I'm not going to leave you here, Roger then stated firmly. His demeanor changed rather quickly. He still sounded heartbroken but also determined in a way. Like hell I'm going anywhere with you, Ace spat out to Roger, venom coating every bit of his tone. You might not like it at first. Oh sheet. But, don't say it, don't effing say it. It's for the best for you dash. You don't know what best FO dash. And your brothers? Ace then quickly shut up at Roger's words. Eyes going wide, and so did Sabo's. What? Sabo then said for the first time during this whole little thing between Ace and Roger. I'm taking you, Roger said, pointing at Ace then to Sabo, and I'm also taking you who I guess is Ace's twin, Roger said softly, a tiny smile reappearing. How did he know that? How did he know that he and Sabo were twins? Was it Shanks who told him? Was it Shanks that had called Roger her in the first place? This was all that shitty redhead fucker's fault then. But, there's two of you, Roger then said as he scratched his head, looking around for another one. No, please not Luffy, not their baby brother. He was still innocent. He didn't need to be corrupted like Ace had been or forced to grow up like Sabo. Wait, he's still missing, that's right. Sheet Luffy. Sabo and Ace yelled at the same time, heads darting all around like they would find their missing brother like that, but neither of them wanted Roger to follow them. Sabo? Holy shit. Sabo is, a hoarse, quiet voice sounded out, stopping the current situation that was currently going on. Sabo and Ace have never turned around so fast before, only to be horridly surprised by the sight of Luffy standing there. Holy shit! A gasp of horror escaped from a couple of the bandits, and most definitely one from Sabo when he and Ace had whipped their heads around to the hoarse sound of their baby brother. Luffy stood there just a couple feet away from Ace and Sabo, a beaming look on his slightly bloody face. Luffy, the 7-year-old boy, looked like he had just walked to hell and back. His hair was covered in dried mud with sticks and leaves poking out, clothes were all tattered and torn, his left sleeve was completely torn, his right sleeve hanging his shirt onto his body, his shorts also slightly ripped at the bottom to nearly mid-thigh, those two were covered in dried-up mud. His small little body was littered with dark bruises, many small and large cuts, bits of them covered in dried mud and dirt. They were pretty sure there's a high chance of those open cuts getting infected. His head, though, it had dried blood from the top of his head that looked like it dripped down to his face. Speaking of his face, it was all red, swollen and puffy, and he looked feverish as well, completely flushed and sickly looking. And God, he was so sickly pale as well, nothing like his usual tan that he gained from always being outside playing, hunting and training with his big brother. Yet he still was beaming a smile to Ace and Sabo, smiling wide despite the pain he must be in. Limping slightly over to them, barefoot and leaving slightly bloody footprints. "I'm back, I found you guys," he said, excitedly trying to run over to his big brothers. Relief freeing his chest from the uneasy tightness before. Luffy was so glad his brother didn't leave him, he was so scared they wouldn't be here. Pain ached through his body sharply now, causing the boy to jerk when he had moved so suddenly, falling to the ground with a thump. Luffy, surprisingly, was the one who seemed the most horrified by the sight of Luffy. He rushed over to his little brother immediately, sliding on the ground without a care about the rocks and gravel digging into his skin. His hands trembled for a moment before gently lifting Luffy into his arms with faster and faster breaths. Luffy let a pained whine when he was moved, but melted into Ace's touch immediately. Weakly, Luffy lifted his head up to Ace. Looking at him with those big wide eyes, tears filling his eyes, Ace was about to say something snarky about Luffy being a crybaby, but Luffy was more than okay to cry right now. He can't believe this is the state he was in. If Ace had known, he would have looked harder, he would have completely skipped out on sleeping, he would have stayed up all night looking for Luffy. But he didn't, and now these were the consequences. Luffy, what happened? Ace choked slightly as he stumbled on his words, looking back at Sabo, who had run over only a moment before, kneeling right beside Ace with his own shocked eyes. Sabo looked over Luffy's body, his lips pursing each time he saw an exposed wound covered in dirt and mud. He was pretty sure that was how infection started. It still had been raining last night as well, and they did get caught in the rain before they ran from Shanks. "Luffy," Sabo says to his little brother, concern filling to his very core, tilting the boy's head to him to look over his face. Luffy was definitely sick, that feverish look and heat coming off him wasn't normal, but he looked pale. "So, pale, what happened? Did you get out of the rain? Find shelter?" Sabo asked Luffy with a very concerned tone, just trying to keep his hold soft on Luffy's cheeks. The boy wasn't one to get sick, he had a very strong immune system for his age, but that never meant he couldn't get sick, and looking at his state, his immune system was definitely weakened. Luffy hummed absent-mindedly before shaking his head. I needed to find you guys. Thought you got lost." Sure, he told his big brothers with a trying to give them a smile. His words were being slightly slurred on, and he shivered hard as Luffy tucked himself further into Ace's hold. How could he laugh like that? He looked like he was going to cry, and yet he still dares try to give his brothers that frighteningly impressive bright smile that matched the sun itself. He was shivering badly. He wasn't warm, but he didn't feel that cold either, but either way Ace held Luffy closer. If his brother was cold, then Ace would give him all the warmth in his body if he could. "You idiot," Ace muttered into Luffy's hair. "Please don't say you stayed in these when they were wet," Sabo asked Luffy softly, gently tugging Luffy's damped clothes. Sabo's hand gently brushed over the bruised and dirt-covered arms, trying to brush the dried bits of mud off him. Luffy only nodded with a smile, probably not even hearing what Sabo was trying to ask him. They had forgotten all about Roger when Luffy had come into sight of them. Both ultimately decided that Luffy was so much more important than this pirate BSRD. If only the guy could take a hint and leave them. Hey! Because next thing the three boys knew, a pair of large arms had wrapped around their much smaller frames and they were being scooped up awkwardly, limbs getting slightly tangled and pressed up right into each other. Ace could feel a vein bludgeoning out of his head. Luffy had let a pained groan out when he was being suddenly moved roughly and squished against his brothers rather uncomfortably. Who was holding them? Luffy didn't like it. "What are you doing, you fucker?" Ace shouted at his incurable donor with a small thrash before immediately freezing when Luffy yelped out in pain, tears falling down his already swollen eyes. "Sheet, I'm sorry, Lou." Ace stuttered out an apology, biting his lip as he did, before raising his head back up to Roger with a glare. But the man wasn't looking back down at the three boys. Instead, he seemed very determined to get out of this jungle while also concerned. Ace didn't know why he looked so concerned and why this man had even bothered grabbing him and his brothers. "Let us go!" Sabo yelled, moving his body around since he wasn't the one that was directly squished into Luffy. Getting an arm free, he started hitting it against Roger's chest. He wasn't doing much until he remembered he had teeth, even if one was in fact chipped. Roger yelped slightly when he felt teeth dig into his skin. He wanted to activate his haki to cover his arms, but that wouldn't be good, especially not for the blondie's teeth. "Hey, stop that!" Roger says loudly, his loud booming voice rattled the three boys. Geez, he even sounded like Luffy when he was frustrated. "I'm trying to save your brother. Any longer in the condition he is in, he could develop bad hypothermia and infections that could spread to his blood," he tells the two, not stopping his sprint. The bandits long gone behind. They didn't even get the chance to follow after the four of them. "We don't want any help from you," Ace shouted at Roger with a burning gaze, his jaw clenching tightly. Roger didn't stop, but his expression did change a little. "You love your brother, right?" Roger then questioned Ace, making the boy look puzzled by his question, like he was wondering why the hell this bee was even asking a question like that. Ace exclaimed with a confused tone, "Do you love your little brother?" Roger says with a firm and pretty stern tone, "Yes, I do, BC." Ace shouted, trying to be mindful of Luffy while he yelled at his BSTRD donor. "Then you'll let me help him. If he doesn't get the proper care he needs, he will die. These cuts are deep enough to get infections into his blood and he does not want that, and he is very well looking like he is getting hypothermia," Roger tells his son with the utmost serious tone, looking down at Ace and Sabo, the twins. They both stopped what they had been doing. They knew Luffy's injuries were bad, but they didn't know it would be life-threatening. "Luffy can die like that?" Sabo asked in a worried tone, eyes widening with fear. How many times did Luffy have to keep almost dying and scaring his big brothers, huh? Their little brother really needed to stop doing this to them. "Yes, but he won't because you will let me help him. I have the best doctor on my crew. He can save Luffy," Roger tells them, seeing how scared Sabo was at the thought and how abnormally quiet Ace was being. Sabo bit his lip and looked to Ace, his twin, who looked back at him with that conflicted look. They didn't want Luffy to die. But they also knew the only good doctors on Dawn Island were within Goa Kingdom, and no way would any of them help. Doctors in Fusha Village always needed more supplies that are too expensive to get and definitely hard to get as well. Luffy croaked out weakly, "I don't feel cold, my head hurts really badly, my whole body aches," the boy muttered with a painful tone, a pout forming as he tries to burrow his head into Ace further. Ace couldn't think right now. This whole mess has been getting to Ace far too much, and Sabo needed to take over. "Fine," Sabo says reluctantly, ignoring the glare Ace shot at him, "but we ain't paying a single dime of anything or give you anything for it," Sabo growled out to Roger, giving the man a glare. He was calmer than Ace was, but Roger can tell there was a more feral and aggressive part deep in the boy. Probably more so than Ace was. "Of course not, I'll never charge my sons for anything. I'll give you 3 in the world if you want," Roger declares loudly and proudly. Ignoring the two boys' yells. "We're not your sons, you maniac." Rayleigh had just finished his 5th bottle of rum before finally stopping. He didn't want to run Makino completely dry anymore, and the lady had been very kind and nice to give an old man like him a discount because he was Shanks' friend. The lady was too kind for her own good. Looks like I have to go clean up the big oaf's mess, Rayleigh then muttered with a smirk as he left the party bar, running a hand through his hair as he looked around. The sun from before was dim with some clouds covering it. It had been warmer before, but with the sun being covered the warmth had dwindled and it wasn't as bright as before. Rayleigh found himself huffing slightly, hand on his hip as he thought where he should look first. The jungle would be good, but he heard from Makino it was a big place with abnormally large animals inside. Even the plant life was bigger than normal. Pretty interesting for an island within the East Blues. The jungle it is then, Rayleigh says after a moment, hands shoved into his pockets, and he starts leaving the porch of the party bar. And the first step he took, Rayleigh heard his name. Rayleigh! Roger shouted, and the first mate can already feel himself age another couple years older. Rayleigh turns his head to face his captain, who was sprinting with a panicked look and 3 little people in his arms. 1 with blonde hair and a top hat and 2 with raven black hair. 2 of them looked like feral little things, glaring at the king of pirates like a bunch of little angry kittens that had just been threatened by his captain. But the little one, who was smushed up against the older boy with raven hair, didn't look all too well. Even from this distance, and with the boy's back facing him, Rayleigh can see the dirty skin with bruises and torn and tattered clothes. By Oda, Roger, what have you done now? Rayleigh muttered under his breath, pinching the bridge of his nose. Rayleigh, we need Crocus. Roger yelled to Rayleigh. He was still a bit of a distance away from the ship. My son is badly hurt, he yelled, making Rayleigh's jaw clench tightly and his teeth grit. Roger did not just yell that out, but by the looks of the village people's face, the first mate knew it wasn't just his head. We just told with our sons, yelled the 2 young boys, sheaving even more in Roger's hold. Keep it low-key, Roger said. No one can know about his sons yet, he said. Whatever, if one of them were hurt and it was worrying Roger this much could be bad. Rayleigh didn't wait a second and he was already running back to the Oro Jackson. He made it to the harbor without any problems. Jumping on board the ship, he goes around looking for the doctor. Scopper! Rayleigh yelled out to the navigator that was lounging around on the upper deck of the ship. You know where Crocus is? Rayleigh yelled up to Scopper, said the navigator, raised a brow at Rayleigh. Crocus? Yeah, think he's down below somewhere. Check the infirmary, Scopper responded back to Rayleigh before a tiny smirk appeared on his face. But did the Dark King get hurt on this island? Scopper said mockingly and playfully, head tilting to his side with a playful smirk. Laughing loudly when Rayleigh said nothing to him but did respond by flipping the other off. Grumbling something under his breath as he rushes below deck. Crocus, set up a bed, Rayleigh says, nearly slamming the door open to the infirmary as he does. The other old man looks up from his daily newspaper, giving Rayleigh his usual intense and fixed stare. It gets more dramatic as the years go by. A bed? Someone got hurt? He then finally asked with a raised brow, before it furrowed again, is it Roger? Did he already get into some kind of fight and got hurt? He asked with an annoyed tone. Rayleigh gave Crocus a head shake. No, actually, it was one of his sons, Rayleigh told Crocus as he crossed his arms, leaning against one of the medical cabinets in the room. Another raised brow. Sons? Crocus questioned with a surprised tone. He's already found them? The first mate nodded. Then Crocus was already up from his chair, preparing a bed and whatever he may needed. He may not know the kid's condition. For all he knows it could be a grazed knee and Roger was overreacting. He's been such a worrywart for one son that he has never met until now, and he had 2 more to add to the pile as well. But whatever, if Rayleigh was telling him to set a bed up, then he must have seen the kid's condition. What's wrong with the kid, do you know? Crocus asked Rayleigh, pulling some stuff out of the medical cabinet, bandages, gauzes, disinfectant. Well, I couldn't exactly see what was wrong, but he was a mess. He had bruises, clothes all torn up and covered head to toe in dirt. I'm pretty sure I saw some dried blood on his neck, so maybe a head injury, and there were cuts all over from what I could see, Rayleigh told Crocus, looking out the round window of the infirmary. The sound of the ocean waves that rocked against the ship were calm, peaceful even. And yet, there never seems to be a moment of peace on this ship and in this crew. No good then, head injury and covered head to toe in dirt with cuts all over are my main worries then, Crocus then said, pulling out some other things. But that probably wasn't all of the injuries this kid could have. What could have happened to the kid? Who knows? They'll find out when Roger gets back to the ship. It doesn't take longer than 10 minutes till the door to the infirmary was busted open this time and a heavily panting Roger with 3 kids tightly squished into his massive arms. "You can put us down now, Ace growled at Roger. And for the first time the man listened, but he didn't put Luffy down with them. "Get the kid on the bed," Crocus said to Roger before the boys could complain about Roger giving them Luffy as well. Roger listened to the doctor's orders, placing Luffy down onto the already prepped bed. Crocus nearly gasped himself at the condition of the kid. It wasn't good, not at all good. The kid was shivering like hell, skin definitely covered in dirt and dried up mud. His skin looked clammy and pale, lips slightly blue even, dazed eyes wandered around, breathing was slower. Crocus looked at the boy's legs, also covered in many bruises and cuts like the upper half of his body, but the soles of his feet looked horrible. They were blistered, bleeding with deep cuts on them as if the boy walked on sharp rocks or gravel. Hell, maybe the kid did because it certainly seemed like it. His feet were no expectation as well to the dirtiness and grime. It looked like it was already in his cuts on his feet. "Roger, what the hell happened? The kid has mild hypothermia and he has cuts all over him covered in dirt. He needs to be washed first before I can give him anything," Crocus told Roger, turning around to grab a fresh clean cloth out of a drawer. "Hurry up, get a bucket of hot water," he said to the captain with his iconic intense stare which made Roger spring into action. "Right," he says, already running out, before coming back for a quick moment. "Also look after my other 2 boys," Roger said before he was back on his quest to get a bucket of warm water. "You're not our dad," the 2 growled out with such feralness. Of course Roger's boys had to be feral and not like their own dad. Well, Rayleigh can see that for the blonde since he really wasn't Roger's actual son, just some kid that his own son adopted. But his actual son, which Crocus believes is the other raven-haired older-looking kid that looked like a perfect mix of Rouge and Roger, mostly Rouge with that angry look on his face. Kid must hate his dad because he was the pirate king, heard other things about the captain that put a bad image on Roger. Understandable when put in that kind of situation, but this freckled covered face kid looked more than just angry, there was that deep-looking grudge in his eyes. But Crocus can't stand there any longer. He needed to help this kid. "What's his name?" Crocus asked the 2 boys, picking up antiseptic and dapping it onto the clean cloth he had gotten out. "What?" the blondie questioned, snapping out of his head when the doctor spoke to them. "Your brother's name?" he asked once again, gently trying to dab the cloth over the boy's cuts and any exposed wounds that could be in risk of getting infected. It wasn't good right now because of how dirty the kid was, but he needed to do something for now. "Luffy," the freckled covered one told the doctor, glare softened slightly but still a hardened glare of weariness and caution, not anger like Roger had received. "Luffy," Crocus repeated under his breath, testing the name on his tongue as he looked at the kid's face. A pair of stitches that look like they had just been stitched a couple of days ago under his eyes, that leave a scar. He wonders what the boy looked like when he wasn't like this, in pain, cold and confused. "Luffy, can you hear me?" Crocus asked the boy, leaning up closer to the boy's face, inspecting it. All dirty, but there was dried blood that had been slightly washed off but not well seeing as it was still sorta there. The boy didn't answer verbally, only looking back at Crocus with slightly hazed over and dazed eyes of confusion. "Cauliflower, women?" Luffy croaked out with a confused tone, voice trembling with his shivering. "Flower Man? Really? Did he just call Crocus Flower Man?" Crocus let a deep sigh out before responding back. "Yes, sure," he said to Luffy before pulling back and grabbing a blanket and tossed it over Luffy. It could take Roger a little to get some hot water, but they needed to keep Luffy warm for now until then. "What happened to him?" Crocus asked the 2 brothers who had come up to the bed that held their little brother on it, still looking weary at both adults in the room. "So we were going up a hill, it was storming and raining pretty hard, it was all slippery and the mud covered everything," Sabo started explaining to the doctor quietly, clinging to the bed closely. They both looked to Luffy with quilty looks. "I had been carrying Luffy on my back," Sabo continued, eyes flickering down slightly. "I slipped and we had all went falling down the hill," the blonde explained to Crocus nervously. "We don't know what happened to Luffy, we somehow got split up and he was on his own. He was out all night and nearly all day. Ace finished for his twin with bit of a more colder tone than his brother. A darker look on his face as he looked over Luffy's unnaturally still body, not including his shivers and tremors. It had been raining all night, said he didn't even look for shelter, other than that we don't know what happened, Ace said with a huff. He acted nothing like Roger, but Rayleigh wasn't sure if that was a good thing. It was unnerving seeing Roger's son as this angry little feral and cautious, while his father was a happy-going guy with a childish behavior. His mother, well, she was a stubborn woman, and Rayleigh can see that in Ace. She had a short temper as well for such a calm-looking woman as well, but even then she had been a kind and understanding woman that Rayleigh had gotten along with quite all right. It had been rather upsetting for the whole crew when they heard their favorite thief that had stolen their captain's heart for herself was gone, died. In childbirth. The boy inherited more from his mother than he might think. That explains the hypothermia then, Crocus muttered with slight annoyance. How could this kid stay out all night in the rain? Did he have a death wish? Crocus comes up to the other side of the bed, gently parted through the boy's hair, trying to look for any open wounds on his head. If there was, then that could be very bad, and Crocus wasn't sure he was equipped with the right materials for such a jarring head injury. It was slightly weird though. Boy's skin, no, his whole body was weird feeling, squishy, maybe too squishy. So just to make sure he wasn't just imagining it, Crocus reached to Luffy's cheek, pudgy swollen cheek. It felt rubbery. That wasn't normal. Crocus then pulled on Luffy's cheek and shockingly it had extended with him. Not the normal way, it stretched as if it was rubber and unnaturally long as well. Even Rayleigh was surprised by this. What, is that a devil fruit? Rayleigh questioned the boys, straightening up immediately. The boys looked at them before nodding. He ate the gum fruit, I think? Sabo told Rayleigh quietly. Made him a rubber person, he explained with a small shrug. He didn't really know and it was hard to understand. Luffy. The gum fruit? Like the fruit that Shanks and his group had stolen from a ship from the world government? This kid had eaten it. That reckless little brat. We don't know much, only found out a day or so ago. Ask that redhead bee for all I care, Ace then said, almost growling at that point. Okay, message was received loud and clear then, kid. Rayleigh thought to himself. He shakes his head. He couldn't believe he still had to beat some sense into that ex-cabin boy even as an adult now. Shaking his head like a disappointed parent, Rayleigh finds himself walking out of the room. Where are you going? Crocus questioned Rayleigh, having gone back to his search for any open wounds on top of Luffy's head. Getting some more booze and to beat some responsibility into that cabin boy of ours, Rayleigh told Crocus, then left quickly before the man could get on his back for binge drinking. Crocus was then clicking his tongue before he could give it to the other man, grumbling something under his breath. He managed to find the cause of the blood on the kid's head. It was in fact a gash on top of the boy's head. It didn't look deep, hence why it had seemed to stop bleeding, which was good at the very least. That meant it was minor, and the boy definitely had a concussion though, but with all the clumps of dried mud and dirt it could get infected, and that would not be a pretty experience for a kid this young. That was good. He's not going to die, is he? Sabo then asked Crocus, staring at his little brother with wide, concerned eyes. They held this type of exhaustion in them, though so did the other one as well. They both looked concerned and worried. Crocus was quiet for a moment. He didn't know what to say. Normally to his crewmates he would tell them maybe something snarky or sarcastic. They were adults, they can handle it. These were just two kids though. He couldn't tell them something like that and expect them to act like mature adults, because they weren't. Your brother will be fine, Crocus told the two boys, seeing that heavy burden on their chests lift when they heard his words. They must have been so worried for their little brother. They had certainly been nervous little things, fidgeting and pacing all around. Since the door had already been busted open right off the hinges, Roger had just sprinted right into the room, coming to a stop as he held a bucket of hot steaming water. I got the water, he said, panting like had just run a marathon. Crocus wasn't going to even ask what had happened because it always had to be extra with their captain. Finally, took you long enough, old geezer, Ace grumbled angrily, his arms crossed and he looked like a mess already, bags under his eyes and an exhausted look on his face. That had taken too long, and it was starting to become torture to watch Luffy shivering and trembling while having occasionally mumble about being cold and curled up in himself more with the blanket for warmth. Crocus didn't wait another moment. He took the bucket of water and placed it down on a simple wooden bedside table. Another fresh and clean cloth in hand, Crocus dumped it into the hot water, not caring for the small prickling pain of the heat. He has survived way worse than that. Wringing it out slightly, Crocus pulled the blanket off Luffy, muttering an apology when the boy shivered more to the sudden cold air, teeth clattering together. Crocus makes quick work at scrubbing the boy's skin clean from any dirt and grime, taking extra care with any bruises and cuts. Luffy melted into the feeling of warm cloth on his skin, warming him to the bones before it was a quickly short-lived joy as it moved away and the air immediately cooled the water left behind on his skin. It was already too cold. What was going on? Where was he again? Luffy doesn't remember. His head hurts too much to remember. There was a stinging and throbbing pain on top of his head. He hated it. He hated all of this. He felt bad. He didn't like how bad he was feeling. It was too cold for this. He would rather be laying out in the sun already, basking in its warmth with his brothers next to him. His brothers, Ice brothers. Where were they? They had just been here with him. Ace had been holding him, giving Luffy a hug. They didn't leave him alone, did they? They couldn't have. Luffy thinks he could feel them with him. They were close, but he doesn't know where. Someone was cleaning him with a cloth. They were scrubbing kinda hard, he thinks, or maybe they weren't. He couldn't tell. Actually, he wasn't feeling awake right now. He wanted to sleep. It was too cold and painful to stay awake right now. Dazed, half-lidded wide eyes slowly begin to flicker down, opening and closing ever so often. Sleep would be good right now. He'll feel better when he wakes up. It'll all be fine when Luffy wakes up. He knows it. It was a long process. When Luffy had finally passed out from exhaustion, his brothers had freaked out when that happened, thinking their brother had died until Crocus finally showed them Luffy's pulse, still beating even though it was slower than what Crocus would have liked, but he didn't want the boys to worry about that after seeing the relieved looks on their faces from feeling the beating pulse of their brother. First, having to completely scrub Luffy down with warm water, be thorough with every wound that could have potentially have been covered in dirt and grim and gotten in the wound, which was practically every single one at this point. Crocus needed to wash Luffy over again even after washing him from all the dirt, but Crocus would rather be safer than risk an infection from happening. He washed the boy's hair as well. Crocus had finally started wrapping Luffy up in bandages, first disinfecting all the cuts and grazes on the boy before he had wrapped Luffy up in bandages. Might as well start calling the boy a mommy because he kinda looked like one being wrapped up like one now. Okay, now that one kid is down, how about you two? Crocus said out loud, looking over to the two older kids who stared back up at him with a blank stare. They were already bandaged, but they looked sloppy and definitely done up by just the two of them. No way, you stay away from us. Eyes started to heavily flicker open. A light had been annoying. It was right in his eyes, on his whole face actually. It makes Luffy groan in displeasure, wrapping his blanket over his head for more sleep. But Luffy felt refreshed and better actually. Faintly he could remember feeling all grimy, slightly sweaty and in pain the last time he had been awake, but he was all better now. Eyes opened wide now and suddenly Luffy was fully awake. Now vaguely Luffy remembers waking up from time to time. Each time was like a weird daze, but he remembers there being a couple people in his room, a couple times more often his brothers right by his side. They helped keep him warm, helped him drink some warm delicious drinks and yummy food that he ate much slower than he would have. They fed him like a baby, he remembers. Then there were other people he had never seen before, an old-looking dude with a beard that had 3 lines on his chin. He was really gray as well. Then there was Flower Man as well. He had a weird look on his face. It was funny. Luffy was pretty sure Shanks had visited as well. Luffy was surprised. He had thought the pirate had left already for his adventures. Luffy found himself pulling the blanket off his head and forced his body to sit up. It still ached, but less from what he remembered. Taking a good proper look around, Luffy immediately recognizes this as a ship. He was on a ship being rocked back and forth by the waves. A sense of excitement filled Luffy's heart. His head whipped to his brothers, but not without a quiet hiss and whimper of a sharp pain. Ow, that hurts, Luffy pouted, reaching a hand up to his bandaged covered head. But even then Luffy still looks over to his big brothers. They were sleeping on a separate bed from Luffy together. Well, how come they got to sleep together, huh? Luffy wanted to join the two of them too. Shoving the blanket off himself, Luffy climbs off the bed he has been sleeping in for who knows how long and makes his way to his brother's shared bed. His feet hurt as well, they were covered in bandages too. Luffy thought that would give him some more padding, but he guessed not. Oh well, he can deal with this pain, as long as he gets to sleep with his brothers. They didn't leave him, and Luffy was happy they didn't. They were brothers after all. What kind of brothers abandon each other? Silently as a 7-year-old could possibly be, Luffy climbed his way up onto the rather small bed, clumsily making his way into the middle of his big brothers, moving their tangled limbs around a bit before he was snuggled comfortably within his brother's arms. This was nice. It was really nice. Luffy wishes he could stay like this forever with his 2 big brothers. He was so lucky that he got the coolest and most awesomest brothers in the whole wide world. Luffy took a deep breath in. The sunlight was nice now, basking its warmth onto him and his brothers, making them warm. He releases a content sigh, snuggling his head into the chest of either Sabo or Ace, whoever, but they both hold Luffy close to them even in their sleep. Then Luffy remembers that he was right. The sun beamed brighter, creating a brighter light, and yet created a soft warmth that blankets over the 3 comfortably. The moon and stars were always pretty when they were peaceful, and they shined so beautifully as well. Sabo groaned out in discomfort. It felt like there was something heavy on his chest, almost stopping his lungs from contracting to get air in and out. Groggily, the blond boy opens his eyes, flickering up and down as he tries to beat the sleep out of his head. He stared up blankly at the ceiling for a moment, trying to gather all his thoughts before looking down to what was lying on his chest. Black raven hair filled his hair. He thought it was Ace for a moment before his twin's arm had whacked his face from the other side of him. He looked to his side with a confused expression, seeing the freckled-covered face next to him, snoring as he slept. Sabo looked between the two. Then for a third time. Before his head whipped over to Luffy's bed that the boy had been resting on for the past 4 days, to see it was abandoned with the blanket half tossed out of the bed, just hanging off. Then Sabo looks back to the black hair on his chest. Luffy. His baby brother was on top of him. Sabo shot himself up quickly with wide eyes, accidentally knocking Luff to the side to be crashed into Ace, forcing the other to wake. Sabu, why'd you do that? Luffy whined, grumbling as tiredly as he was. Yeah, what's the matter with you, Sabo? Ace groaned out, still half asleep and not grasping the fact just yet. A moment passes before Ace too had shot himself up from the bed, now awake. Once again knocking Luffy, till the boy himself forced himself to sit up along with his brothers. HMDN, what's wrong? Why are you guys up this early? Luffy grumbled out annoyedly. His big brothers stared at him with shocked eyes. What's wrong? Ace repeated, his jaw clenching slightly as his hand balled up into a tight fist. What's wrong is that you scared the living shit out of me and Sabo. Ace shouted at his little brother, hitting the boy right on the head, which didn't seem to hurt as much as it used to before he was rubber, so now his rubberness could take the impact. Didn't mean it still didn't hurt. Oh, Ace, you big meanie! Shouted Luffy, hands hovering over the swelling bump on his head, which was mindfully away from where his head injury had been, but his other big brother came to the rescue and smacked Ace right back. Ace, we can't be hitting Luffy like that right now. The doctor said he still has a concussion. Sabo scolded Ace with a scowl, to which his twin only responded back with a scowl of his own. He shouldn't be being scolded right now, it should be their dumb kid brother. Well, he wouldn't have been like this if he had just taken shelter from the rain. Ace shouted right back at Sabo. Luffy pouted at their antics. Worried, Ace had told Luffy that he had scared them. I scared you guys? Luffy then asked the both of them quietly, his hands falling into his lap, and a guilty look appeared on his face. It was like the sun had been blocked by a bunch of clouds, blocking the warmth of the sun from them. His head was tilted down in that guilty puppy-like way, looking at his brothers with those massive round eyes of his. Damn it, if this kid wasn't so dim and cute, they would have left him for dead sooner or later, maybe. No? Yes. Sabo said to Luffy with a sigh, reaching over to the side of the bed, picking up the straw hat that has been at Luffy's bedside table this whole time. He huffed before placing the hat on top of Luffy's head. It fitted him, even if it came from that Shanks dude. What happened? We weren't as banged up as you, and where did you go? Sabo asked Luffy gently, Offering the boy a gentle smile, Luffy sniffled slightly before wiping his unshed tears away with his arm. Luffy had just shrugged at first with a tiny mumbled, "I dunno no. I woke up I guess. It was raining like it had been before and you guys weren't with me so I thought you got lost," Luffy told Sabo quietly, not making eye contact with the other as he pouted even more. "They got lost? Really, we weren't the ones lost, it was you," Ace said, his pointer finger poking at Luffy's forehead. "You dumbass. How did all the cuts happen? Where are the bruises from?" Ace then asked next after clicking his tongue against the roof of his mouth. The bruises mostly came from when we were falling, so were the cuts. I was bouncing all over," Luffy exclaimed with his childish expressive emotions, making Sabo and Ace's brows raise a bit. "Bouncing?" Sabo questioned Luffy as he tapped his chin. Luffy nodded eagerly, even despite the pain and dizziness it brought as he did so. "Yeah. It was insane. I bounced off the path and into trees and some rocks even," Luffy exclaimed to his brothers. They both looked at each other and back to their eager little brother who was very enthusiastic to tell them about his little solo and nearly life-threatening adventure. So Sabo and Ace leaned back and got comfortable. They'll be here for a while and they knew it, but they were willing to listen to their little brother's childish explanations about what had happened on his adventure. They weren't sure how long had passed before all three of their stomachs were growling and cramping painfully for the need of food. Luffy whimpered with a frown on his lips, looking to his brothers with his hands hugging his stomach. "Sabo, see I'm hungry," Luffy drawled out, falling back on the bed dramatically, spread open like a starfish with his tongue sticking out. The twins looked at each other and at their own rumbling stomachs. They needed food, and they sure as hell weren't going to wait for these pirates to bring them food anymore, not when Luffy is awake now and they didn't need to worry about keeping an eye on the boy to make sure his pulse still beats. Well, they could go to Makino's, but that would mean having to face the Roger pirates and they definitely didn't want to do that. They could sneak back up to Mt. Kalubo and go hunting, but looking at Luffy the boy was still a little less energetic than usual, probably still getting over the hypothermia and the fever he had caught while he had been resting. A moment passed before a spark ignited between both Sabo and Ace. They glanced at each other before nodding with a sly grin on their faces. The Roger pirates were currently all busy right now and only 3 were on board, all on the top deck of the ship. They had a whole food storage below the deck. Raid their food supply and sneak back to the treehouse. The perfect plan. "Come on then, we'll go find food then," Ace said to Luffy with a smirk on his lips, jumping off the bed already with Sabo following in lead with Ace. Luffy shot up with a wide grin, stars practically shining in his eyes as drool dripped from his mouth. "Really? Yay, let's go!" Luffy exclaimed excitedly, jumping off the bed without a care. His feet planted on the ground before he stumbled a bit at the sharp pain that had coursed through his feet as soon as his feet made contact with the ground. "Ow!" Luffy whined, jumping a bit as he picked one of his bandaged feet up to look at the bottom of it. It was fresh bandages, and yet there seemed to be some little bits and parts of it staining lightly red. Maybe that jump caused his cuts to reopen. "Damn it, Luffy, be more careful," Ace scolded Luffy as he walked up to the boy, looking at his feet before he was clicking his tongue. "It's not even that bad, you baby," he said to the boy who glared at Ace. "I'm not a baby, you jay." Luffy yelled at Ace, willing himself to hold back his tears. He wasn't going to cry because of getting hurt like this, no way. He'll be the Pirate King and he couldn't cry because of such a little ouchie like this. Ace only scoffs at his brother, arms crossed and snickering at the boy, and Sabo could only sigh at his brothers. He wonders how he got paired with these two sometimes. But he wouldn't trade them for the world. The boys were gone. And it wasn't just Sabo and Ace, Luffy was gone as well. Roger had just been coming back from the party bar with 3 plates of food from Makino to give to the boys. Thank the seas, he had placed the plates down before he actually realized that the 3 boys had just been replaced by pillows of themselves, because he would have dropped the food all over the ground and Crocus would have given the lifetime of a lecture thrown on him. But back to the original point. The brothers were gone, his sons were gone, replaced with pillows. "Oh no! They've been turned into pillows, Riley," Roger exclaimed to his first mate, who was standing in the doorway with a blank stare. He raised a brow at his captain's silly exclaims. "No, Roger, they clearly have run away. It seems the other little bugger has finally woken up, Rayleigh explains to Roger with a head shake. In one hand he had a bottle of booze that he was now very grateful he had decided to keep because he was definitely going to need this. Dealing with his captain for the past 4 decades was enough. He didn't need Roger's sons also coming in problematic and creating chaos everywhere they go. And seeing how they have already run away, Rayleigh realizes very easily that they won't deal with Roger taking his boys home, or in Rayleigh's words, kidnapping very well when it happens. In maybe the next day or 2 he predicts. He wonders if he could get a day of peace before that happens. If they've run away, then we need to find them, Ray. Roger said, like the over-worrying parent he was. Rayleigh never would have guessed Roger would be the parent that worries about their child every step they took when out of sight. But considering Roger has had his son taken from him for the past 10 years and has only found his kid now that hates him, Rayleigh Van see where the concern is coming from. He can only hope it doesn't become overbearing. That's the last thing any of them wants. An overbearing and overprotective Roger, maybe even mother hen as well if pushed far enough, is the last thing this crew needed. Rayleigh had been running a hand over his face as Roger freaked out more. He needed a way to calm the old man down before a noise picked up his attention. His ear perked to the noise that was coming from within the ship. A few patters of footsteps, stuff falling down from down further the ship, and muffled talking, giggles and laughter coming from there as well. His brow raises. Maybe the boys weren't actually that far away as he had thought. Activating his observant hockey, Rayleigh looks around for 3 very noticeable presences, and sure enough, he finds the signatures of the boys. Right in their food storage, of course. Rayleigh, are you even listening? Roger yelled at his first mate before shutting up when Rayleigh raised his pointer finger up in front of the 2 of them, quickly shutting Roger up. He brows furrowed for a moment, and he was about to ask what the hell his first mate was doing, until he heard it as well. Laughter, bubbly laughter coming from within the ship. It didn't sound like it was coming from Ace or Sabo. Roger's eyes widen at the sound of the laughter. It must have been coming from Luffy. He stays silent, hearing 2 other muffled and quieter voices come in, making shushing noises and lightly scolding their little brother for being so loud. Oh, Roger says, already calmed down by just hearing the 3 boys still on the ship. Yes, they're in the storage, Rayleigh says calmly to Roger with a nod, leaning off the door and already walking down the hallway of the ship. Roger followed behind, not even trying to quieten his steps. He can see them as well now with the help of observation hockey. They were in the storage room eating the food they stored there. Looks like they will have to restock before they leave. Did they forget to tell the boys they were going to bring the 3 of them food? No, he would have told them, he thinks. Luffy, don't eat that. Ace hissed at his brother, his face stuffed with food that they had burrowed. Luffy, ever their annoying brother they have forgotten and slightly spoiled, would stop downing fruit after fruit and whatever else he could get his hands on. Even the non-edible food, the one that needed to be cooked or made into something. He was acting as if he hadn't eaten for days, which he kinda hasn't, but he was still the gluttonous the 2 knew and loved. Ace snatched the frozen piece of meat out of Luffy's rubbery hand before the boy could give himself food poisoning. That was the last thing Luffy needed right now, and they didn't want to sleep in that DMN infirmary any longer as well. Why not? It's me, let me have it. Luffy complained, his arm extended out for the frozen meat, more so than what any normal human being could stretch, but lucky for them, Luffy had no idea how to control his powers. Meaning his stretched out arm flopped to the ground and snapped erratically back to its former state, slapping himself in the process. Ace and Sabo were stifling their laughter and snickers as Luffy landed on his butt. Looking at his brothers with a betrayed and sulking look, face red from embarrassment and from the impact of his rubbery arm smacking him right in the face. It's not funny, you jerks. Luffy shouted at his brothers with a wobbly quiver of his lip, and the twins were bursting out in laughter. Laughing at their brother's misfortune. See, I told you, Lou, you got the lamest power ever, Ace laughed out, a smile wide on his lips, and his shoulders seemed to feel lighter as he laughed with his brothers. Luffy frustratedly slammed his fist against the ground as he erratically shook his head. No, it's not. You're lame, Ace. That's why you're being mean, because I have a cool power and you don't, the boy defended himself, crossing his arms as he puffed his cheeks out like an angry little hamster. It was far from intimidating, but Sabo knew better than to rile Luffy up more. He would like to eat tonight. Ace seemed to have glowered at Luffy's words when his jaw tightened. He dropped the food scraps in his hands and walked over to the smaller boy. Reaching out, Ace pinched Luffy's rubber cheek and stretched it wide. Like hell, I would want a power like yours, you crybaby. I wouldn't even trade the ability to swim for something as dumb and as weak as your. He scowled at his brother, half-heartedly, ignoring the boy's complaints and whines between, I'm not a crybaby, and, that hurts, Ace. I think it's pretty cool, Luffy, Sabo chimed in, pulling Ace's death grip on Luffy's cheek off, giving the younger teary-eyed boy a soft smile as he did. Luffy seemed to beam at Sabo's praise before turning back to Ace and sticking his tongue at the other. Cease, Sabo agrees with me, sure, Luffy mocked Ace with a snicker as Ace glared at his twin. Don't tell him that, Sabo, he's already spoiled enough as is. Ace scolded his twin with an annoyed eye twitch. Nah, I'm not spoiled, you dummy, Luffy retorted back to Ace. Before his big brother could get another word, there were loud booming footsteps coming their way. Ace could feel a real anger vein pop. He knew who it was without even having to guess who would make such annoying loud steps of confidence. Ace gritted his teeth slightly. Looks like those annoying BSRDS had come back much earlier than they had expected. Luffy though looks to the door with a confused look. Right, Luffy wouldn't know what has happened for the past few days. He wouldn't even know about the Pirate King was here with them and they were on his ship. Who's that? Whose ship are we on? Luffy then asked his brothers, dropping a whole apple down his mouth without even bothering to chew the thing at all. Because if one thing is for certain, Luffy definitely knew this wasn't the Red Force, Shanks' ship. Ace glanced down at Luffy with a conflicted look for a moment, brows scrunching slightly, and the happy expression on his face had dropped to that dark and gloomy one. Luffy didn't like that look. It meant his brother wasn't thinking nice things about himself. As soon as Sabo was going to explain or summarize what had basically happened, Ace had cut him off before the blonde could even get a word in. They're pirates, not the good kind, Ace told Luffy, tone serious as he spoke, and Sabo could find himself frowning slightly at Ace's words. He didn't think the Roger pirates were all that bad. He liked Rayleigh as well. But he loved his brothers more. Luffy's face scrunched up slightly. Pirates? Was it Shanks' men? No, it couldn't be Shanks. They were nice people. Ace could see Luffy's thoughts just by looking over the boy. He was so easy to read, so gullible, navy, and so easy to be taken away. Ace didn't want that to happen. He couldn't let that happen. He already nearly lost his brothers to Blue Jam and Sabo to his own parents. He's already cried once for Luffy back when Terminal Grey was set to blazes, an unruly and destructive thing fire was. If it weren't for Ace, then Sabo would have been taken by that dim imbecility of a father that dared even calling Sabo his son. He taught that BSRD a lesson, but there was no need to dwell on that anymore. Sabo was safe and Luffy was safe. Ace took a deep breath like Makino had taught him to do. He didn't need those thoughts to keep his brothers safe, Makino told him so. These pirates had, helped us, but they want something for it, Ace told Luffy, seeing the look Sabo was sending him but ultimately ignored it. It was a lie. Roger had told them 1,000,000 times that he wanted nothing in return from them. They were his sons, he said. But Luffy listened intently to his big brother. Help? Were they the ones to help me get better? Luffy asked Ace with a head tilt, looking down at the bandages wrapped around his body. What do they want from us? Luffy asked, looking between Sabo and Ace for an answer. Sabo and Ace were quiet for a moment, looking to Luffy then to each other and to the door where the loud footsteps were coming from. We don't know yet, haven't said anything, not till you woke up, Sabo said to Luffy reluctantly, just going with what Ace was saying. But what we do know is that they want to take us away, Ace said to Luffy. The boy's eyes widened at his big brother's words. Take them away? Where to? Away from Dawn Island? From Makino and Dayton? They can't be taken away from them. They still needed to train and became great pirates. No way! Luffy exclaimed loudly, they can't do that. He said to his brothers, giving them an anxious sort of expression as his eyes flicked between them and the door. No, they can't, Sabo said to Luffy, even if he knew they were lying to the boy and telling Luffy these were bad people that they wanted something from them. Sabo knows himself the Pirate King wants to take them. He wouldn't be calling them his sons if he wasn't planning on taking them with him, and Sabo wasn't sure if he wanted that or not. Which is why we're getting out of here now, Ace says with a smirk, picking up the frozen piece of meat. Hey Lou, I think you powers can be handy for something, Ace told Luffy, seeing how the boy brightened immediately from the praise from Ace, the big brother that normally bullied and teased him. Really? How? Now Rayleigh wasn't sure if these kids were smart or just fully reckless little things, but he did try and tell his captain that maybe they should go about this at a much slower pace and different approach. But honestly he doesn't know why he still tries with the oath. Nonsense Rayleigh, Ace just needs to see that I am not here to harm him or his brothers or anyone else on this island for that matter, Roger had said to Rayleigh before promptly opening the door to the food storage room without even bothering to knock or first checking with his observation hockey what those 3 kids had been up to. Murder apparently is what they had been up to. Hey boys dash. Roger couldn't even get a third word in before a piece of frozen rock-hard meat had gone flying right into his face. Yay headshot. A new voice yelled out with that childish youthfulness to it. A wide smile on the boy's face with his eyes beaming stars in them. Did these two really use their brother as a slingshot? Because by the looks of it, it sure as hell looked like it. With the very newly awakened Luffy clinging sideways to a pipe, Ace had the boy's ankles in his hands and stretched the kid out enough so the other brat could use Luffy's upper body as the slingshot for the meat. Smart and effective use of the gum fruit. But this whole little thing did end up with his captain down on the ground, probably concussed as of right now for not being prepared to handle a blow like that. What did I tell you, Roger? Rayleigh says with a disappointed headshake as he crossed his arms in disappointment. His captain didn't answer, way too out of it to answer. Seems that a little attack had taken down the Pirate King. Who knew it could be so easy to take Joe D. Roger down like that? Some pirate you are, Rayleigh added. They needed another approach if they wanted the boys to come with them and actually be comfortable with them like a family. The 3 brats came out of the room looking down at Roger. Nice one Lou, you got the pirate, Sabo said the younger boy with a proud smile as he patted Luffy's head. Sure, he looks stupid, couldn't believe he was going to kidnap us and make us pay him back, Luffy giggled out with a massive smile. His brothers standing behind him also looked down at Roger's concussed body. It was Rayleigh's first time seeing the boy well and actually up and at it, and honestly, he thought this was a mini Roger, more childish since for obvious reason, Luffy was an actual child, Roger was just a big man child. I couldn't believe it either, he is rather stupid for a pirate, Rayleigh agreed with the boy, leaning against the wall so the boys could get past him. The smallest boy looked up at Rayleigh with those massive eyes of his, and Rayleigh found himself faltering slightly at the boy's seemingly intense stare while it looked like he was just looking at Rayleigh like any normal person would. But it felt like the boy was staring right into his soul. What the hell? At least it had only lasted a quick second. Did you get kidnapped as well, old man? Luffy asked Rayleigh with a head tilt. It had made Rayleigh snap back to himself for a moment before deciding to go along with it. Seeing as his big brothers weren't currently attacking him or telling Luffy some bullshit about him. Yeah I did, thanks to you I'm now free, he says to Luffy, a smile curling up on his lips. Then Luffy was beaming at him, before Rayleigh would have said his captain was just as bright as the sun itself. But after meeting Luffy for the first time like this, he was sure the boy was the sun itself. I'm Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy then introduces himself to Rayleigh, hands on his hips. And I'm gonna become a great pirate someday and I'll be king of the pirates. Okay, he can see why Shanks had given Luffy Roger's straw hat now. Monkey. Did they really have to get twisted into that insane family? Rayleigh would rather not have the marine hero Garp on their buttes for taking his grandson. But the wind had nearly been knocked out of Rayleigh when he heard Luffy's words, he was so joyful about it as well. Rayleigh found himself chuckling slightly, running a hand down his face. You? The king of the pirates. Rayleigh chuckled out, the boy pouted slightly at Rayleigh, puffing his chest out defensively. Yeah. I will be, when I get my own crew and everything I'll be the best pirate out there, Luffy defended himself. Sure you will, brat, Rayleigh said to Luffy with an amused tone. So you plan to conquer the Grandline when you're older then? Rayleigh asked Luffy with a head tilt. But the boy only looked at Rayleigh confusedly. Conquer the Grandline? Luffy said confusedly to Rayleigh with a confused head tilt. Rayleigh nodded. I don't want to conquer anything, Luffy exclaimed to the old man, taking him by surprise once again. The king of the pirates is the freest man in the world, Luffy said to Rayleigh, then pointed to himself, and I'll take that title because I'm gonna be the freest person in the whole world. Luffy exclaimed to Rayleigh. His dream, to be the freest. Oh, Rayleigh has heard this before. Joy boy. Rayleigh had whispered in an astonished tone under his breath. Luffy, who had miraculously heard him, just looked at Rayleigh with that confused, scrunched-up look. Joy boy? Who's that? My name is Monkey. D. Luffy, old man, Luffy pouted out to Rayleigh, his hands placed on his hips, before Ace was pushing his little brother along. Not the time, Luffy, we need to get going, Ace said to Luffy, pushing Luffy forward. Just walking on top of Roger without a care in the world. Sabo at the very least walked around the unconscious pirate king. Whatever, by old man, a later weirdo kidnapper man, Luffy said to both Rayleigh and Roger, waving them a goodbye. Rayleigh waved Luffy bye, and Sabo as well. See Mr. Rayleigh, Sabo then said to Rayleigh before catching up with his little brother, though Ace had lingeried behind a little, looking back to Rayleigh. They stared at each other for a good second before Ace's eyes had flickered down to his dad, and indescribable anger filled the boy's eyes. Tell the Beathy that if he wants to play house, go find some other unfortunate women to have his betrothed child and play house with them, Ace gritted out to Rayleigh, fist clenching tightly. If he wanted his son so badly, then he should have never have left, Ace said coldly and with no hesitation to Rayleigh, before he was turning back around. Move to catch up with his brothers. Rayleigh just stood there in place, letting a tired huff out before pulling out his flask. You might have done messed up this time, Roger, you fool, Rayleigh said to the still unconscious man, taking a massive swig of his flask. The boys ran through Fush Village. They didn't want to get caught up with any more pirates for now. They have been missing their daily routine way too much, honestly. Sabo and Ace have missed their brother. Shanks has had more than enough time with Luffy, he can go now. Of course, as they had quickly tried to make their escape as secretly as possible, it was like the redhead knew they were already awake and at it. Luffy! Shanks yelled out for their little brother. Luffy turned around immediately to Shanks's voice. It was like the boy had forgotten the whole conversation they had with the pirate that had gotten them into this situation they were currently in. Hi Shanks! Luffy managed to get out to Shanks before Ace was picking the boy up, and the two older boys ran off without sparing a glance back. And one would think over the course of 3 days you would be able to smooth things out with two feral 10-year-old boys. Apparently that did not include Ace and Sabo. Shanks had tried DMN hard to get closer to the two and smooth out their misunderstandings while Luffy was resting, but nope, that had failed. Damn it, looks like he'll have to go back looking for the boys, even after the first time in that jungle. At least it wasn't raining so the boys wouldn't trip like they had last time. A cold, uncomfortable shiver went up his spine when that thought came to Shanks' mind. God, he could still remember when Roger had come sprinting out of the jungle with the 3 boys bunched up in his arms. He remembers seeing Luffy in that state. God, if he wishes he never has to see the boy in a condition like that again. He doesn't think he can take it if he had to see that bright, alive and innocent life in Luffy disappear so quickly. Just like that, pale, cold sweat skin that was covered in mud, dirt, bruises and cuts that could have gotten infected. That almost dead look on Luffy's face was something Shanks never wanted to see again. It wasn't a good look on the boy. Breath, Shanks. The redhead then suddenly heard Ben say to him, hand on his shoulder to keep Shanks grounded. He suddenly essayed in a sharp breath, taking in oxygen that he didn't realize that he had been depriving himself of. Ben stayed right by his side as Shanks took a couple more deep breaths, calming the man down. Luffy's fine. Ben reassures Shanks, firm grip on his shoulder. Look at him, he's smiling and everything, like nothing happened, the other told Shanks to reassure him. It did help Shanks a little, but he didn't want what happened to be like nothing ever happened. They needed to talk to those boys, they needed to actually properly talk with them. Roger for F's sakes needs to get his sheet together if he want to pull this off and stop denying that he technically did. Abandon his wife and son. Even if it was to help Rouge and Ace, but he should have stayed with them. Why did they let their captain go out like that? They had known Roger only wanted to help Rogue through the Portgas D Rouge. That's why they had agreed to leave, because none of the crew wanted to see Rouge or the baby dead when the birthing happened. But it would have been better if Roger had just stayed behind with the both of them. They wouldn't really be in this situation. But then again, Ace wouldn't have his brothers, Luffy wouldn't have his brothers, and Sabo wouldn't have them either. Shanks groans, already feeling a headache forming. He rubs his temples with an annoyed look. Don't think too hard, might just overwork that brain of yours. Ben then teases Shanks, wrapping an arm around the other's shoulders. Shanks sighs to himself. By the seas, whatever would I do without you, Ben? Shanks groans to his first mate with a pout and defeated look. Ben only chuckles. Dunno, you're pretty high maintenance though, he says with a smirk. I'm not high maintenance. Why can't I go to Shanks? Luffy whined to Ace as he dragged Luffy up the hill to Mdikaluba. This time the ground was free from any slipping hazards thanks to sunny weather for the past couple days. So Ace and Sabo didn't have to worry about tripping and losing Luffy like that again. You spend too much time with him, plus he's leaving soon, remember? Ace told Luffy bluntly, looking back at his kid brother with a calm and collected look as Luffy just pouted up at him. Yeah, I know that, but I already forgave him. He said he was gonna tell me he was leaving and I believe he would've, Luffy told Ace as he lowered his head slightly, talking more quieter than he normally would. He looks slightly guilty even once more. Sorry I haven't been spending a lot of time with you guys though. Luffy then apologized to his brothers, stopping in his tracks as his head fell to the ground, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. His big brothers both stopped in their own tracks a couple steps ahead when Luffy stopped walking along with them, staring at the kid brother with a blank look. Sabo and Ace both glanced at each other, then back to Luffy. A smirk spreads on their lips. Ace crosses his arms and walks back over to Luffy. We forgive you, Ace told Luffy easily, arm over Luffy's shoulder. The boy brightened instantly at Ace's words and Sabo tried to keep himself from snickering. Really, you do? Luffy exclaimed happily, looking up at Ace with the biggest star-like eyes, and the older raven-haired boy finds himself almost regretting what he's about to say to Luffy. Almost. Yeah, we do, but only if you admit one thing, Ace tells Luffy, straightening up slightly as Luffy stares at him with admiration that gives an uneasy feeling to Ace's chest because he doesn't deserve someone like Luffy to look at him like that, like he was actually worth something. The thought leaves him easily when Luffy's eager voice broke him out of it before it could even really start. What is it, what is it? Luffy asked Ace, over and over, arms going around Ace. A pink blush dusted over Ace's face when he felt Luffy wrap his smaller arms around his body. Easy, Ace gritted out with a straining smirk, trying to rip the rubber boy off him. Just admit that you're a crybaby that needs his big brothers to come and save him like always. Ace then teases Luffy. The reaction was immediate. Both Ace and Sabo found themselves burst out laughing at Luffy's reaction. The boy took his time processing Ace's words before he was immediately unraveling himself from his big brother and started yelling at the both of them at the top of his lungs. Face flushed red embarrassment and from how angry Luffy was getting. You jerks! Luffy angrily shouted at his big brothers with a stomp. He couldn't believe he fell for that one. Luffy pouted, looking like a cute angry little baby, arms crossed and his back turned from Ace as the boy had plopped himself down on the ground. You're so mean to me! Luffy yelled angrily, legs pulled in close to his chest as he hid his face in his knees. Oh come on, Lou, we're only joking, Sabo told Luffy with a quieter laugh as he wiped his eyes. Walking over to the younger boy. Crouching down beside Luffy. We didn't mean it, Sabo told Luffy, but the boy didn't budge, not even for Sabo. Ace then came up to Luffy's other side, crouching down beside the boy, head tilting to see if he could see Luffy's hidden face. But Luffy stubbornly just shook his head. No way, you two are way too mean to me, Luffy whined, his voice muffled from behind hidden within his arms. Ace huffed at Luffy's words. That I'm sorry, Lou. The freckled-covered boy then apologized to Luffy, surprising which caused the boy to perk up slightly. Luffy's head twitched to the side slightly, his wide doe eye looking at Ace with a pout on his lips. Are you really sorry? Luffy asked Ace with an untrusting tone, thinking the older one could have something up his sleeve. But Ace had no smug or deceiving smirk on his lips and nodded honestly to Luffy. I swear, sorry for upsetting you like that, Lou. Luffy then turned to Sabo with an expecting gaze. Sabo had been slightly surprised, but that was because he didn't think Ace would take those lessons that Makino offered Ace about good manners and such while they waited for Luffy to get better. A shock, but Sabo felt like it was a good one for Ace. "Yeah, I'm sorry too, Luffy, sorry for laughing at you." Sabo apologized to Luffy, lifting the boy's straw hat on his head properly. Luffy, the bright kid he was with his ever-quick mood swings, was already up and beaming at his older brothers. "Sabo and Ace apologized for calling me a crybaby." Luffy celebrated as he bounced up and down, his limbs stretching out ever so slightly in an inhuman and bendy way, impossible for a normal human to achieve. But Luffy was far from normal, especially with the way how the sun practically glowed behind the boy in a mystical way. "Ethereal," Sabo would say. The two just smiled and got up from the ground, joining their little brother with all his smiles and laughter that finally filled out the jungle silence after 4 days of it being empty, voided from any of the sun's beaming rays of sunshine. Laughter can be once again heard within the jungle, restoring a piece of familiarity. The sun was never alone, as it had the stars to keep him company, and the moon never needed to be voided in darkness as it had the sun to beam his sunshine onto the moon. Roger had snapped out of his unconscious state with a groan and a throbbing headache, feeling a swelling bump formed there where he had gotten hit by that piece of frozen meat. "Finally awake?" His first mate then said, sat in chair beside him, of Roger was in the infirmary. "Had to haul your heavy, but here, so be grateful I didn't leave you in the hallway to be laughed out by everyone else," Rayleigh told his captain calmly with a tiny smirk on his lips as he sees Roger in the corner of his eye groaning once more in annoyance. "Where are the boys?" Roger asked immediately, his concern going mostly to where those 3 little troublemakers were than his own self. He can deal with a small bruise and swelling bump on his head. "They left as soon as they got their fill," Rayleigh immediately answered to Roger calmly. The Pirate King hummed and nodded, then moved to get up before Rayleigh was pushing him down back onto the bed. "Rayleigh?" he questioned his first mate. "I know what you are going to do, Roger, and it won't work," the man said to his captain. Ace had left a message, he then said to Roger. The pirate beamed slightly that Ace had left a message for him. He had been trying really hard to connect to his son, but Ace just wouldn't budge and spent most of his time locking everyone but Makino, Dayton, sometimes Shanks, and Crocus out of the infirmary. "It's not a good message, Roger," Rayleigh then told his captain with deadpan tone and expression. He said word for word, "Tell the BSE that if he wants to play house, go find some other unfortunate women to have his BSE child and play house with them." Rayleigh relayed the message for Roger, seeing how the man's expression changed instantly. His brows had furrowed, corners of his lips pulled down into a small frown, and a glassy look of worry, guilt, and despair had slightly washed over the happy-going captain they had all known and loved. Roger didn't say anything, just sat in the cot, staring blankly down into his lap with an unreadable expression. Hell, Rayleigh couldn't even tell what Roger was thinking about right now. Does he really think that? Roger then managed to force out after a good minute of just sitting in silence. Rayleigh didn't even need to say anything, he had just confirmed with a nod. Every bit of Ace's tone was 100% and so rageful that it was surprising that a tiny body like his could hold so much hate for one man. Another moment of silence passed before Roger was breaking it once again. "How do I fix it, Rayleigh?" Roger asked his first mate, tone flat, but Rayleigh could hear the desperation in his voice. Roger had leaned forward a bit, hand over his eyes and shoulders hunched over. His body trembled slightly and Rayleigh was surprised. The first mate hasn't seen the captain cry for years now. Only 2 times have Roger cried in front of another, was when Rouge and announced to the whole crew and to Roger that she was P-Argent-T. The second time was at Rouge's grave and his missing baby. Drops of water came down the captain's face, splashing onto his arm and onto the sheets of the cot. Rayleigh didn't speak, he was too stunned to say a word. How do I don't know what to do," Roger trembled out, voice breaking and stumbling over his words as he does. Roger never stumbles over his words and his voice never breaks like that. "Biota, what do I do?" Rouge would know, he muttered to himself as he curled in further into himself. "God, Rouge would be so much better at this than me," he said, his breaths becoming slightly uneven, and Rayleigh decides it's time to intervene. Roger's first mate comes up to his side, forcing the man to look up, revealing a face full of tears and puffy redness starting to form. Oh, how hopeless his captain was. Rayleigh thought musely. Gently, Rayleigh pressed a hand to Roger's fast-beating chest. "Come on, Captain, take deep breaths with me," Rayleigh says, making exaggerated breaths for Roger to follow him. It took Roger another minute before he finally got the memo and followed after his first mate, taking deep breaths in and out, the hand on his chest rubbed in a slow and comforting motion. It calmed Roger down immensely. This wasn't something Rayleigh did often. Actually, he hasn't even done this in years. He hadn't been sure it would still work. "Okay, better now, Captain?" Rayleigh asked Roger, patting his chest ever so lightly. Roger gave Rayleigh a jerky nod, taking a few more shakily deep breaths. "I'm in now, thank you, partner," he said to Rayleigh, offering the man a smile, not his beaming ones but one of reassurance for his first mate. "Sorry, I don't know what happened there," Roger then apologized to Rayleigh. "It's fine, Roger, it happens to everyone." Rayleigh comforted Roger once more, his hand moving from the captain's chest. "You need a plan, Roger." Rayleigh then decided to bring up. It was better to bring it up now than to delay the inevitable. Roger only solemnly nodded. His hand came back to his face, rubbing his temples as he tried to think. "I know, but I don't know. I've never done this before," he rasped out quietly. Roger was at a complete loss. He never took care of a kid before. That privilege had been taken away from him. "No parent knows what they are doing with a bunch of gremlins, Roger," Rayleigh told his captain, trying to get the man in a better mood. "But you have gone about this the wrong way," Rayleigh confronted Roger, and the captain nodded to Rayleigh's words. "That is obvious," Roger grumbled out. Rayleigh shook his head. "And stop it with the childish tone. Ace doesn't need that right now. What he needs is to know that he deserves to be here." Rayleigh scolded Roger lightly, but his tone was serious. "Deserves to be here? But Ace deserves everything," Roger questioned Rayleigh with a confused tone, brows furrowing again in a confused manner. "That he deserves to be alive, Roger," Rayleigh said this time with a more firmer tone than before. Roger's eyes widened at his first mate's words. Did Ace really think that? That he didn't deserve to live? "He thinks that," Roger said breathlessly in disbelief. "How do you know?" The captain asked Rayleigh, looking at his first mate properly. "Heard him muttering to Luffy while the boy was asleep, kept saying how it should have been him instead, how he should have been better to protect him, how he doesn't deserve to have as good as Luffy to love him," Rayleigh told Roger, face calm and composed as he spoke to Roger. It was definitely disheartening to hear coming from a kid at such a young age, but he needed Roger to be calm. He didn't want his captain making any more impulsive decisions considering how fragile this situation has become, because they had Ace's very, very fragile trust on the line right now, and Rayleigh was sure that if that very little trust broke, then this whole thing will go downhill very quickly. Roger seemed to look at Rayleigh in complete disbelief at his partner's words. He genuinely couldn't fathom how Ace could think he didn't deserve good things, much less be alive. Oh, and how much Rouge had wanted Ace to be alive. Oh, how she desperately wanted their boy to have a life, a good life. But this life wasn't looking good for Ace, and Roger was already failing at Rouge's last wish of wanting Ace to live a happy and good life. Roger had been failing as a father for leaving the both of them when they needed him the most. "Oh, Rayleigh, I'm horrible at this," Roger said with a sniffle. "I shouldn't have left," he then admitted, his first ever regret in his whole life, and that was leaving his wife and their unborn child to sail. "Roger, you just wanted to find anything that would have saved both Rouge and Ace," Rayleigh said to Roger, face subtly changing to one of sympathy for his captain. "Yes, it wasn't the right move leaving the both of them when they needed you, but your heart was in the right place. You didn't mean anything bad of it," Rayleigh told Roger, tone firm as he spoke so it got through the oaf's thick skull of his. "And this is now a second chance, Roger. Fix the mistake you had made. Look at Ace now. He isn't as miserable as he could have been. He has two brothers, his own brothers, that make his life a sheet ton better," Rayleigh reassured Roger, hand on the bigger man's back, patting and rubbing in a circular motion to comfort his captain. "Ace needs to believe from you that you didn't come here just to play house with Ace as some doll. Ace needs to know that you love him, truly love him, and that he deserves everything, just like you had said." Tears were falling down Roger's face again, but they weren't out of control like last time. "Oh my boy," Roger then rasps out, his head falling into his hand again. "You deserve the world." The boys immediately got their daily scolding from Dayton as soon as they made their return to the hut. "You demon brats," Dayton yelled, Her shout scared away nearly every bird within the vicinity of the area. She was fuming with anger. Her face was flushed red with anger. She had every right to be furious with them. First, Ace and Sabo came home covered head to toe in mud and injuries with no Luffy in tow. Second, they didn't eat nor sleep until they had passed out due to exhaustion out of pure worry for their little brother. Then they go running off the next day with no warning or patience for the injuries to heal while the bandits look for Luffy instead. Third, the king of the pirates. Of all people come to her doorstep and start demanding for her to pass over her brats that she has been taking care of for years now. Fourth, Luffy finally comes back looking like death itself. He could have been on the verge of death and Dayton wouldn't lie, but she was grateful that Roger did swoop in at the time because they wouldn't have enough money to pay for a doctor or buy the medicine that Luffy would need. And now, these brats, the ones that come back a couple days later after scaring Dayton half to death, nearly throwing her into cardiac arrest, they come back like nothing happened, like they didn't just make Dayton worry an inch of her goddamn life about these three brats. Making me worry like that? Dayton yelled at them, teeth gritting so tightly together Sabo was afraid they'd start sparking. You three don't just scare me half to death and go missing for 4 days. She continued on and on and on. It felt like forever until Dayton finally stopped with her lecture. Arms crossed and sat in her usual spot. The three boys just seemed to have dazed off halfway through it. Luffy picked his ear while Sabo just stared somewhere else in the hut, and Ace, the only one that was looking at Dayton, just said, "Okay, whatever hag," he said with a blunt and disinterested tone. It made Dayton glower at three boys. The thought of strangling them until they finally listened to a DMN word she said grows stronger day by day, but then Garp would wring her own neck out and most definitely rain hell on her now that the Gold Roger was here to take Ace back, including Luffy and Sabo along with him. Like hell that BSTRD was taking the DMN brats. Garp entrusted her to watch over the three of them. Even if Sabo had just randomly appeared one day, Garp didn't bring her that brat, it was his DMN grandsons that did. But that didn't mean shit, they were that Marine BSTRD's grandsons and he threatened to take her in multiple times if she left them somewhere else or something. Definitely not because she cared about the DMN brats. She'd been more than glad to hand them over to Roger if Garp wasn't threatening her all the DMN time and blackmailing, totally. She couldn't with these boys anymore. Ugh, whatever, not like I could care less about you three anyways, Dayton said to them, crossing her arms with a throbbing vein bulging out on her temples. Just go do what it is you three normally do in the jungle, Dayton quickly said, trying to shoo the three troublemakers away. She just wanted them out of her sight for now, even if they have been out of her sight for the past 4 days now. The three brothers grinned at each other with wide smiles, and Dayton couldn't lie but think this is a better look on the three of them than whatever had happened 5 days ago. Ace shrugged to Dayton's words, arms crossed behind his head casually. Okay then, whatever, he said blatantly to Dayton, already turning his back to the curly-haired women with Luffy following behind his brother like a duckling, and Sabo just followed them with a smile. Let's go to Terminal Grey Fist. I need a new pipe, Ace then told his brothers. He had lost his original one back when they had gone falling. Oh, you think we'd be able to sell that crocodile skin still in Goa? Sabo asked Ace, hand under his chin as he thought about it. Ace only shrugged. Yeah, I don't see why not. We can even grab a bite too, he said to his twin with a cheeky smirk and a chuckle. Then the three were walking right out the door to the hut and back out into the jungle, making their way back to their treehouse. 000. Roger was back out in the jungles, though this time he wasn't running amok like some little kid anymore and was just roaming around, exploring. He wanted to get to know the area where his son has grown up better. Rayleigh had told him that it would clearly take a lot of time for Ace to really come to him, much less accept him as a father and let him feel that kind of love or any love really. It had upsetted Roger, it really did. The Pirate King couldn't believe his son had been suffering like this. Hating himself for his own existence, thinking he wasn't deserving of anything good. In him forever thinking Garp was a good choice to leave his boy in care of. If he had known it'd be like this, then he would have trusted Ace to Edward of all people instead of that Demon Marine. Garp was crazy after all like that. He faintly remembers how depressing his own kid looked from past visits or whenever they had crossed paths. Roger sighed solemnly to himself, hands shoved into the pockets of his pants. There was nothing he could do about it now. that was in the past and it was a bad decision, but Garp is why Ace is still here and why his boy had safely made it here to the East Blues alive, and Ace even found his brothers. There wasn't much Roger could complain about other than Garp being absolutely terrible with kids. It was quiet, surprisingly enough. For a jungle he thought he would have heard more like animal noises, bushes rustling, bugs and insects making their buzzing or croaking noises that normally carried throughout jungles. It was peaceful here, and despite hearing all the rumors of there being insanely massive and overly strong animals in these jungles, Roger can see why Ace and his brother like spending their time here. It was freeing. Thump. And there he went with all his talk about this place being peaceful. Roger hadn't been paying any actual or proper attention to his surroundings and ended up stepping right into a trap. Now he was at least a good couple feet under the ground. Not even his 9 feet reached the top of the hole, which was surprising. Roger said with a confused head tilt. Who in the world dug this pit trap? And who could dig it this deep? Had it been the bandits that lived here on the mountain as well? No, it couldn't be. Roger was told that only the boys were ever this brave to go this deep within the forest, seeing as this is apparently where all the bigger beasts were. Had they dug this? If so, then Roger was mighty impressed and proud of those 3 boys. "Ah man, you're not meat." A childlike voice then called out from above Roger, causing the Pirate King to raise his head up to see the kid who was squatting up there on the actual ground. A boy, raven hair, scar under his left eye, big wide eyes that had to be brimming with that youthful innocence, and an oversized straw hat perched on top of his head, stared back down at Roger. Roger remembers this boy. Of course he does. "Luffy!" Roger exclaimed with a heartfelt cheery tone, staring up at the boy with a wide smile. The boy only stared at him with a confused look, tilting his head at the older man. "Nah? Do I know you, old man?" Luffy asked Roger with a confused look, staring a bit more intently at the man. No, not properly at least," Roger told Luffy with a hearty chuckle, offering the boy a wide smile. Luffy stared at him intently. Shanks and Rayleigh had warned him of this weird stare that Luffy had, how the boy just seemed to be able to stare into your soul and determine whether or not you were good or worth it. But Roger didn't back down from it. Even though a tingle did run up his spine, it felt more exhilarating than anything. He stared right back at the boy, his expression or smile not once faltering. Then Luffy smiled back at him, making Roger light up a little. He must have been approved by this boy without the need to bribe him with food. "Wait, I do know you, Shishishi," Luffy said loudly with a childish giggle. "You're that big weirdo guy that tried kidnapping us." Luffy giggled out, pointing an accusing finger at him with a laugh. And Roger could only really accept that title as it was somewhat true, yes. Even if his smile turned a little more on the deadpan side, it did not once falter at the boy's words. Honestly, though, Roger was more concerned that Luffy was already running around even despite all his injuries that were, yes, healed, but he could have at least recovered a little more. But Rayleigh would call him a hypocrite if he ever said that to his first mate. "Me, a kidnapper?" Roger barked out with a roaring laugh. "Never, and I'm not some weirdo either," he told Luffy, trying to match the boy's own wide and stretched out grin, but it seems his non-rubber body didn't have the ability to do so. Or maybe his body was just getting older as the years rolled by. Luffy tilted his head at Roger before shaking his head dismissively at his words. "No way, you were totally going to kidnap even that other old man on the ship," Rayleigh, the 7-year-old childishly told him. "You mean Rayleigh?" Roger corrected Luffy only for the boy to say, "That's what I said." Roger couldn't even find himself annoyed at the boy, so he only chuckled at Luffy's words. Luffy was hella amusing, and he can see why his straw hat was perched on top of the boy's head. He can see what Shanks saw in the boy already. "Well, to your information, boy, that old cranky man is actually my first mate," Roger told Luffy, waiting a second before the boy was instantly lighting up like the sun. "First mate?" He shouted excitedly. Even Roger himself found himself wincing at the loud-pitched child tone. "Wow, you guys really are pirates. Are you on the same crew as Shanks?" Luffy asked Roger with an even wider smile than before, and Roger didn't think this kid could get any more brighter than he already was. "Yep, that's right. Shanks used to be our cabin boy when he was younger too," Roger happily informed Luffy, which he would find out later that the boy with the straw hat would use that against the redhead man to tease him back. Luffy then sat down properly at the edge of a hole that Roger could probably very well climb out himself but chose not to, crisscrossed and staring down at Roger, greedy for more. "Tell me more, old man, tell me more." Luffy asked Roger once again excitedly, and for a moment the Pirate King's chest tightened, his heart squeezing at the sight. Luffy asks him for more stories from him while staring down at him with those big wide eyes of his that were filled with life and youth and a sense of that youthful innocence that tends to fade with time, and oh how Roger wishes he never has to see that youthful innocence in Luffy fade. And for a moment, Roger wonders if this is what a parent would feel like. A proud parent. And for most of the time he had only known Luffy as the injured brother of his son, the one in that little coma of his while he recovered from his injuries and fever. A smile brightened on Roger's face. "Of course, now let me tell you about the time when Shanks and—" Roger trails off with his stories of Shanks, his adventures and embarrassing moments of his crew that they would surely one day get him back for telling Luffy, the big blabbermouth he was. The sounds of their voices and laughter echoed throughout the forest, and the sun has never been brighter than ever, with two people born for the skies side by side laughing with each other. "You know, that's quite the straw hat you got there, Luffy," Roger mentions to Luffy, catching the boy's attention. He had just finished telling Luffy another story. He doesn't know how long he had been going on for, but it must have been a long time now. Seeing as the sun was a little more than halfway through the sky already, but it was still just right there in the sky to see. Meaning it was just the middle of the day, and both of their bottomless pits of stomachs were growling in hunger. "HM? Yeah, it's so cool, right? Shanks gave it to me," Luffy told Roger with a giggle, grabbing the hem of the hat to push it back more. "We made a promise to each other," the boy told Roger. "Really? What was it?" Roger questioned the boy with a raised brow. Luffy stood up from where had been sitting for the past hour and a half now, ignoring how his legs cramped up from being suddenly moved after being stuck in one position for so long. "I'm gonna become the greatest pirate ever. And when I do, I have to return his hat back to him when I do," Luffy claimed loudly, hands on his hips with that determined smile on his lips. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy," Luffy said to Roger, pointing his thumb at himself, "and I'm gonna be the king of pirates someday." "Shishishi," the boy boldly claims to the current pirate king. His giggles rang out through the forest loudly, and Roger felt his blood rush at Luffy's childish but determined claims, eyes widening, and he can see now why Rayleigh had been so interested in the boy. Why Shanks had given Luffy his hat, he can see it fully now. "You will conquer all of the Grandline and steal the One Piece from the Pirate King himself?" Roger questioned Luffy with a wide smile, but his words were genuine. He wanted to know what the boy thought what the title of Pirate King meant in his simplistic and childish mind. Only Luffy just crossed his arms at Roger, pouting at the man with his chest puffed up. "Why does everyone keep asking me if I want to conquer the Grand Line?" Luffy questions with a genuine confused tone. "I don't want to conquer anything," Luffy loudly exclaims, as if he wants the whole world to hear his words. "The Pirate King is the freest man in the world." Luffy began once again, the sun aligned up perfectly behind him, casting a soft glow around the boy. It almost made Roger choke on air. "And I'm gonna be the freest person on the seas and on land," the boy loudly and proudly exclaims with a massive giggle escaping him, and Roger's eyes widen at the sight. This was it, this was the boy that they had been waiting to see. Only, Roger doesn't say anything. No, instead he just bursts out laughing. His laughs roared out through the jungle, almost shaking the ground itself. "Hey! What are you laughing at, old man?" Luffy angrily shouted at the man. A pout took his smile and thought the man was laughing at him for his dream. No, it's nothing like that," Roger tells Luffy as he chokes on his words and laughter, calming himself down. Roger can see it. He can see a future with this boy being the one to free the world of its chains, to be able to liberate anyone that wishes for it. Roger can see Luffy, older than he is now, standing proud and tall, ready to take on the world for whatever it may throw his way to take his dream for him. It was a wonderful future that Roger would have the honor of witnessing. "It's a wonderful dream and promise," Roger told Luffy, and the boy stared at him. It was like this was the second or maybe first time being told this. "Never give up on something like that," Roger told Luffy with a sincerity in his voice. Luffy's seemingly soulless despite being full of life wide eyes once again stared into Roger, looking into his soul, looking at anything to see if the man was lying to him, but Luffy couldn't find it. Only then did the boy smile again at him. Sure, I like you, old man. Luffy happily said to Roger, Ace was wrong about saying you were a bad pirate. Luffy then told Roger that the older man can only grimace slightly at his son's sharp and hurtful words that hadn't even been said to him. I think everyone is wrong as well, Luffy then declared. You aren't the big, scary and mean pirate king I've heard about, the boy said to Roger with a childish giggle leaving him, shocking the pirate captain. So Luffy did know he was the one and only pirate king then, but even then, why tell Roger his dream if he had known he was the pirate king? Why tell me your dream if you knew I was the pirate king? Roger questioned Luffy. Only for the boy to tilt his head again at Roger, but his smile never faded. Because, I know you aren't gonna stop me, Luffy simply told Roger, and for the boy's words, it certainly was the truth. A moment passed between them for a moment before Luffy was breaking the silence. Ace didn't like me either when we first met, Luffy revealed to the old man, sitting back down on the grassy grounds. That took Roger by surprise at first. Really? He asked with a raised brow, and Luffy just nodded eagerly. Yeah, he used to throw me in ravines, crocodile pits and whatever he could, just to get me to leave him alone. Shishi, Luffy told him with a laugh, despite how horrific that sounded for anybody else hearing this. But I got to him when those big blue jam meanies tortured me when I didn't tell them where Ace's and Sabo's treasure were. He told the Pirate King, surprising the man even more. Tortured? Luffy had been tortured? This bright little kid? He highly doubted anyone could hurt a kid as bright as Luffy, was much less try and torture him, but alas, that was just how the world is. Roger guess. Not everybody is the same after all. Didn't make Luffy's experience any less worse than it was though, and whoever these blue jam guys are, they will surely see it tenfold of the Pirate King's rage for hurting his boys and trying to steal their treasure if they had not already been punished for it. He doesn't express these thoughts because he knows Luffy knows what he was thinking. But we beat them up really, really good, Luffy told Roger proudly with a bigger smile, and he waits till he sees Roger's tense muscles relax at his words. I like you, so I'ma help you, Luffy then told Roger, causing the man to raise both brows in surprise. Helps? He questions the young boy. Luffy nodded. Yep, Ace doesn't like you, he hates you, Luffy tells Roger as bluntly as one could, not even bothering with sugar-coating it, and Roger was slightly grateful for that. But that's because he doesn't know you, Luffy concluded to Roger. I know you're his dad as well, and I know Ace doesn't like himself either, the boy mentioned, going a little more solemn than before. His smile faltered ever so slightly, but he looked back at Roger with a look of determination. But that's because he thinks you're bad, and so he is bad as well, but you're not bad and neither is Ace. Luffy loudly declared, this time meaning it for the whole world to hear him. Oh, there goes his heart again. Clenching at this boy's sweet and innocent words. He had such a simplistic mindset, and yet Roger can tell it does the boy good when it came to people. So then Luffy held his small soft child hand out to Roger, looking at the old man like he knew Roger could do this. I want my brother to feel love, and I know you want it too, Luffy said to Roger softly. No words came from the older man, he only stared at Luffy with wide eyes. He was surprised that a boy at Luffy's age could say these things and be so sure of himself that Roger could do this. He believed in the Pirate King more than the Pirate King believed in himself, and Roger sees Ace's reason for being so protective of Luffy. This boy was made of the rays of the sun, he was born to be pure and give the world simplicity, happiness and hope. To some it would seem like a heavy burden to hold, but Luffy, he doesn't even have to care. He doesn't have to do anything other than be himself. Crickets and other various bugs filled in the silence for Roger, the rustling of the leaves and bushes, the chirps of birds and the wind filled in the void as Luffy waited for the older man to take his hand. And well, Roger reached out to the boy's hand, their size differences in their hands were comically massive. Roger's massive, calloused and strong hands fully engulfed Luffy's childish small soft hands that held no calluses on them just yet. Wow, your hand is massive. Luffy exclaimed to Roger, star-shining eyes as he placed his other hand on top of Roger's massive hand, which once again made his own hand look like a baby compared to Roger's. That's so cool! The young boy yelled excitedly as he bounced up and down happily. Roger wonders if Luffy's cheeks ever hurt from how much the boy smiles so widely. "Thank you, Luffy," Roger thanked the young boy, his words as genuine and sincere as ever, but Luffy just crooked his head to his side again. "Thanks for what? I haven't even done anything." Luffy questioned the old man with furrowed brows and a puckered lip. Roger this time only chuckled softly, rubbing softly over Luffy's hand. No, thank you for loving Ace," he told Luffy, and the boy seemed to get what he meant. "Oh, well, you don't have to thank me for that. I'll always love Ace, he's my big brother," Luffy told the older man with a genuine smile. That was all Roger wanted to hear from the boy. Then Luffy's stomach was grumbling loudly and the boy deflated instantly when he realized how hungry he was. "Oh man, I'm so hungry," Luffy whined with a pout, looking to the sky. "I already missed out on 2 meals now," he then mumbled to himself. Of course the boy would know that. Roger found himself laughing again, amused by Luffy's antics. "Oh, okay, why don't we get some food then?" he said to Luffy, his hands leaving Luffy's own as he hefted himself up from the hole, with Luffy quickly standing back up on his own 2 feet. He stares up at the man excitedly. "Yay. You gonna help me hunt?" Luffy asked Roger, and the man found himself unable to say no to the boy. "Of course I am, we'll get the biggest meat out there," Roger exclaims loudly to the boy with a giant smile, and Luffy's grin widens again. He jumps up into the air in his excitement, fist pumping in the air. They stood side by side and Roger was worried he would step on the boy by accident. Even if Luffy was a rubber boy now, it didn't mean Roger still couldn't hurt him. And he was also worried Luffy would hurt his neck by looking up at him. "Wow, you're so tall as well," Luffy says with an all-like voice, and Roger was chuckling at Luffy's words once again. "Let me ride on your shoulders," Luffy then demanded or asked. "Either one, Roger," as he bounced up and down excitedly as he stared up at Roger with awestruck eyes. Once again, the man couldn't find it in him to say no to Luffy. And he just knows that would not be good in the future.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.